The Dog Who Barked Fire, a paranormal cozy mystery. Eli Carter and the Ghost Hackers, Paranormal Mysteries Book 3. Written by Angela Pepper. Read to you by John Perhala. Chapter 1. Eli Carter drove toward his new job at Ghost Hackers with a big smile on his face. It was Wednesday, and only his third day, but other than the hangover and a broken window in his van, things were going great. He was actually looking forward to his workday, which had never happened at his old job as a delivery driver. Before now, all he'd be looking forward to during his weekday morning commute was his post-lunch nap. Only 3 days in, and he'd already saved countless lives. More like 2 lives, Brenda said, not countless. He looked over at his petite, red-headed girlfriend sitting in the passenger seat of the van. "Sorry," he said. "I didn't realize I was saying that stuff out loud." She smiled sweetly, making him feel worse for forgetting she was in the vehicle with him. "Don't be sorry, Eli. I love hearing about your day and your thoughts. I love how this new job is helping you open up to new experiences, and—" Brenda stopped mid-sentence and began sputtering in irritation as the temporary plastic wrap covering the passenger side window came loose and flapped around her face. To Eli's relief, the discussion of his alleged blossoming sensitivity had been cut short by the loose plastic. Yes, he'd been talking to his girlfriend about his work more than usual, but it wasn't due to any changes in himself, just changes in his situation. He resented the idea that anything had been wrong with the guy Brenda was now calling Old Eli. Brenda howled in outrage as the sticky tape caught strands of her pale golden-red hair. He stifled a chuckle as she cursed the plastic, calling it foul names usually reserved for Eli when he committed toilet crimes in the apartment. Finally, she got the tape pressed down again. "That was difficult for you," Eli said, teasing, "but you didn't give up." She snorted and gave him a crooked grin. "I'm probably getting a bald patch." They both looked at the yanked-out red hairs embedded in the tape. "I might still love you, as a baldy," Eli said. She gave him a giggle that showed both delight and disgust, his favorite kind of Brenda giggle. They pulled up to the delivery depot that had once employed both of them, but now only employed Brenda. He leaned over to kiss her goodbye for the day. She met his kiss with unexpected passion, plus more than a little tongue. His new job had certainly breathed new life into their relationship. He sure wasn't complaining about that. After Brenda jumped out of the van, Eli took a moment to admire himself in the vehicle's rearview mirror. He was a handsome guy of about 30, with medium brown hair and medium brown eyes. All of his features were average enough, but as of that morning, his whole look was really coming together. He rubbed the top of his nose and examined his upper eyelids. There was some mild swelling, but he didn't have the black eyes he'd expected after being punched by his employer the day before. Eli parked the van in front of the Ghost Hacker's storefront and walked up to the door with a spring in his stride. His new work uniform, olive green shirt, cargo pants, and military surplus boots definitely increased his overall handsomeness. No wonder Brenda couldn't get enough of him this morning. He entered the store and confidently strode past the shelves of refurbished electronics, making his way toward the back and calling out, "Hey, gang! Eli Carter is here to kick some ghost butt!" He found the Hart siblings, Con and Valentine, in the small kitchenette, drinking mugs of tea. Valentine looked Eli up and down, then leaned over and whispered something in her brother's ear. Con ruffled his unusual snowy pale hair with one hand, while his dark brown eyebrows raised in amusement. "Yes, Val, I think you're right," Con said. "I believe Eli Carter did have relations this morning with his girlfriend." Valentine's pretty ocean green eyes widened under her brown bangs. Her cheeks turned a delicate shade of pink. 7.5 awkward seconds passed in silence. Now everyone was thinking about Eli having relations. Eli tried not to think about the morning's gymnastics with a lithe and enthusiastic Brenda, lest he beam the specific images directly into everyone's brains. She'd done this half-twist thing. Valentine ducked her head and dashed out of the room, her dark brown ponytail swinging like the tail of a horse at galloping speed. Con handed Eli a mug of hot coffee. "Congratulations, my man." He pointed to an open box of sweet-smelling pastries on the counter. "Have a jelly donut." Eli took one and tapped the sugar off so he wouldn't make a mess on his shirt. He stared at the doorway as Valentine walked away down the hall, her nice curves barely concealed by her jeans and hoodie sweatshirt. "How'd she know?" Eli asked. Con clapped him on the shoulder. "She didn't," he chuckled. "She was telling me the bank account was overdrawn, and we'd better not screw up today's job, or the new employee wouldn't get paid." "Right. What's the job?" Con grabbed a jelly donut. "Smash off." "Is that a type of haunting?" Con answered by crushing his jelly donut against the one in Eli's hand. The red jelly in Eli's donut erupted from the top like a volcano spewing sweet lava. "I win," Con said. He bit into his crumpled but not deflated donut. Around a mouthful, he explained that they did have a paying job for that morning. Valentine had talked to the client on Tuesday, and everything was set up. It was an easy job, slam dunk, a simple poltergeist capture. Eli licked the jelly from his fingers, quietly keeping his doubts to himself. Their last so-called easy job had been anything but. He looked Con over for signs of weakness, but found nothing but the usual muscles and masculine posture. Considering the man had been dead briefly the night before, he was in fine form today, filling out a crisp black t-shirt and camouflage print pants. Eli self-consciously rolled back his own shoulders and straightened his spine. Con continued. "Val actually had a ton of calls yesterday. Today could be a double bill." Eli grinned. He knew all about Con's upscale tactics that some people might classify less as upscale and more as fraud. "You mean charge double?" "No, I mean slayed 2 beasts in one day. We'll take care of the first one before lunch, then hit the gym, then pick up a second paying gig to round out the day." "The gym?" Eli had been meaning to start a training routine at a gym, but his plan was to go solo for a few months to bulk up before he started working out with Con. Actually, before any gym, he would start at home, doing push-ups and lifting household objects. The hallway would be the perfect space for his workouts once they got Brenda's plastic storage boxes organized. Eli totally had it all planned out. He could already visualize his new buff muscles and felt that visualizing success was basically half the work. "We'll skip lunch and hit the gym," Con said as he handed Eli a cream-filled eclair. Eli accepted the pastry warily. "Another smash-off?" "Don't be weird, Eli. You don't do smash-offs with custard." He shook his head and picked up an eclair for himself. He pointed his free hand at Eli's hip pocket. "What's that lumpy thing in there? Have you got a pocket ghost?" Eli reflexively pulled out his set of keys. "Just these." "Eating contest!" Con yelled. "Winner gets to drive the van." Con crammed the eclair into his mouth in one bite, snatched the keys from Eli's hand, and bolted for the exit. Chapter 2. Con was already revving the van's engine by the time Eli got outside. Someone let out a loud wolf whistle. Eli turned and found Valentine standing in the shop's doorway, holding out 2 bags of equipment. "Don't forget the gear, genius," Valentine said. "Ouch," Eli said as he took the bags. "That really stings, having an actual genius sarcastically call you a genius." "I can only imagine," she said coolly, her expression neutral. The tires of the van squealed on the pavement behind Eli, and other drivers honked at Con as he pulled out into traffic. "I guess he'll circle the block," Eli said. "You really shouldn't let him drive." He hoisted the bags higher on his shoulders. "These are heavy." "As much as I'd like to stand here stating the obvious, I've got stuff to do. We really are getting a lot of calls about jobs." Eli stared into Valentine's eyes, as green and pretty as beach glass. He wanted to say something to her, right now, while they had a minute alone, to make things between them more comfortable. He wanted to say something witty and disarming. Instead, he said, "I'm not like other guys." She arched one delicate brown eyebrow. "I wouldn't be so sure of that." Before he could figure out what he meant by that, let alone explain it to Valentine, she was gone, back inside the store. He readjusted the straps of the equipment bags on his shoulders and walked down to the corner to wait for his van to reappear. When Con pulled around, he leaned over to pop the passenger door open, but didn't bring the van to a full stop. He kept rolling. Eli tossed the bags in first, jogging to keep up with the vehicle, then finally caught up enough to jump in. He didn't complain to Con about not stopping, because he wasn't all that annoyed, and because he was still thinking about the humiliating interaction with Valentine. Because he had a microchip in his brain that prevented him from lying, this was far from his first awkward moment with a girl. In fact, all of Eli's dating experiences pre-Brenda could be summed up in a single descriptive word: cringeworthy. This situation with his new coworker was different, though. He wasn't trying to date her. He just wanted for them to be friends. How was he going to accomplish this when everything he said was so cringeworthy? Especially when it seemed like her brother was trying to dial up the tension. He turned and studied Con, who was happily humming along with the radio and testing all the levers around the steering column. The windshield wipers came on, along with the glass cleaning spray. Con whooped with elation, then moved on to the turn signal. "Eli, check it out," he said. "Tick, tick, tick. I'm telling people I'm going to change lanes, but really, I'm not." He chuckled while watching drivers around him react as he signaled one way, then the other. "That's enough horsing around," Eli said. "You're going to get us pulled over, and you don't even have a driver's license." Con ignored him and kept playing with the turn signal, as well as the flashing hazard lights. "Suckers," he muttered about the other drivers. "Why do you act like this? Why is everything such a big carnival for you? You're probably drunk already." "Pull over. I'm driving." Con turned off the windshield wipers, turn signal, and hazard lights. "Fine, I'll behave," he said, his voice stony. Nobody apologized. It seemed like the sort of situation where someone ought to, but neither did. Eli considered asking where the poltergeist job was located, but then noticed the address was written on Con's forearm, as usual. They were headed toward one of the city's nicer suburbs, which was a good omen for them getting paid. After they'd been driving a good 10 minutes, Eli had a sudden guilty realization. He reached out for the equipment bags and unzipped them. He counted only 5 of the hexapods. They were short one, stolen out of his van while the equipment had been in his care. "Valentine already juiced up the power," Con said, answering Eli's unspoken worries. "The hexapods are now technically pentapods. It took her all of 5 minutes, too. Valentine can do almost anything in the time it takes a guy like me to make a cup of coffee." "She really is a genius. I've never met anyone like her. Do you think other people find her intimidating?" Con kept his eyes on the road and used the turn signal to responsibly change lanes. "She does get dates, if that's what you mean. She's been seeing a personal trainer guru lately. He's man enough to withstand her testicle-withering gaze." Eli felt his cheeks get warm. Valentine was dating someone. That wasn't the answer to the question he'd asked, but it certainly was the answer to the one he hadn't. "Well, how can I make her like me?" Eli asked. "Just as a friend, obviously." "Give her time," Con said. You guys will be buddies soon enough. Then I'll be the third wheel, as usual." "I can't tell if you're joking or not." After a moment, Con glanced over, his dark green eyes serious. "What's the deal with that little chunk of metal in your brain? I tried to get Val to microwave your head last night when you were asleep, but she said it wasn't safe." Eli made a mental note to thank Valentine for not microwaving his head while he was sleeping. Now that Con had seen the chip during his moment of X-ray vision, he was bound to keep asking. Eli didn't want to tell, so he kept his mouth shut, locking his jaw against blurting out his secret. "Must be a smugness chip," Con said. "You always wear your seatbelt and obey the speed limit, and when we go day drinking, you act like I'm pouring the booze down your throat." He tapped on the steering wheel in his own rhythm, unrelated to the music on the radio. "Yep, definitely a smugness chip." "Think whatever you want," Eli said. "Good. Now I'm thinking about supporting the local stripper economy." "Okay." "Now I'm thinking about how my life is a carnival, and that means spending the day's profits on dances from Brandy with 2 E's instead of paying my smug employee." "Okay," Eli said, but he wasn't listening, much less bothered. For the rest of the drive to their poltergeist job, Eli wondered if the device in his head could actually be a smugness chip. Of course, smugness wasn't the right word, but he did wonder if it was something that regulated his behavior in more ways than just preventing him from lying. He'd had problems doing illegal things before. Back in high school, even after getting arrested inside the crashdown zone, he still hung out with that dirtbag Falcon, mostly because he was too scared to say no. Falcon wanted Eli to shoplift stuff with him, but he wouldn't. As much as Eli wanted to fit in with the group, any group, even a bunch of solvent-huffing losers, he couldn't bring himself to steal so much as a chocolate bar. He'd been disappointed with himself at the time, but not years later, when he heard through a mutual acquaintance that Falcon and some of the old gang were serving time for a residential break-in that turned violent. Eli stared through the murky plastic, covering the passenger side window, admiring the city as seen through a hazy filter. Time was like this plastic, putting wrinkles and scratches all over his memories. He wondered what Falcon was up to right now, and what being in prison felt like. If there really was such a thing as a behavior chip that stopped people from doing bad things, they could have put it in Falcon's head instead of making him go to jail. Other than himself, though, Eli had never heard of anyone getting a chip in their head. Cats and dogs get microchips in the ears for identification, but that was different. Or was it? Eli wondered if maybe that was all his chip was, identification. Perhaps it had not been installed after his adoption after all. Maybe it was put there earlier by his real parents, so that when they returned for him, they'd know he was theirs. As he gazed at the scenery, he let himself fall into one of his favorite daydreams about his wonderful parents who'd been desperately looking for him all these years. Outside the van, the scenery changed from the city to the highway, then to charming cul-de-sacs populated by attractive homes on wide lots. His wonderful parents might live in a neighborhood just like this. Con slammed the brakes suddenly and brought the van to a screeching halt. "We're there?" Eli asked. "About a block away still. But check this out." Eli leaned forward and looked at the road in front of the van. A small creature with a long tail and big brown eyes blinked up at them. "Is that a rat?" Eli asked. The creature tipped its head and stared back at him as if to say, "And what are you?" Con rolled down his window and waved his arm. "Shoo! Get off the road, little rat!" The creature barked as if to say, "I'm a dog, you dummy." Con honked the horn, which finally got the tiny dog moving off the roadway and down a sidewalk. Con started the van rolling again and shuddered dramatically. "This street is so creepy. Let's get this job done and get the hell out of here." Eli looked around at the manicured lawns, colorful houses, and beautiful gardens. He hadn't thought it until Con said the words, but the street was creepy in its perfection, like the ironic setting for a horror movie. He spotted what he thought was their destination. One house looked different from the others. Instead of being a bright color, it was painted a drab brown, had a less than perfect garden, and a patchy-looking lawn that had grown 2 inches taller than that of its impeccable neighbors. The tiny dog who'd been running alongside them on the sidewalk gave them one more look, then ran into the open doorway of the brown house. To Eli's surprise, Con didn't stop the van at the brown house with the overgrown lawn. They kept driving for another block, then stopped in front of a cheery yellow house with a perfect front yard. They stepped out of the van. Eli could hear a woman yelling, her voice coming through an open window in the house. "Not my good china! Bad ghost! Put that down!" There was a crash that sounded like someone's good china being thrown on a tile floor. Con didn't have to check the numbers scrawled on his forearm. They were definitely at the right address. Chapter 3. Eli wanted to charge into the haunted house, but Con steadied him with a hand against his chest. "We ring the doorbell this time," Con said, "like paraprofessionals." Eli turned his head to listen. The woman wasn't screaming in terror, just muttering unhappily as she, judging by the sound of it, swept up piles of broken china. They rang the doorbell, and a moment later the door opened. Their client was a weary-looking but spry senior citizen, with a well-behaved miniature poodle standing quietly at her side. Both the woman and the poodle had tightly curled white hair. The dog wore a rhinestone-studded pink collar that matched the woman's glasses. Eli found it unusual that the dog wasn't going nuts over the doorbell ringing, like most little dogs he'd known. Con introduced them by their actual names and said they were from ghost hackers. He turned to Eli and explained, "Val booked the job." Eli shook the client's hand. Her name was Carla Peters, and she was a retired school principal. He barely glanced at her because he couldn't take his eyes off the tiny poodle. He'd never seen one quite that small. Weirder still, the poodle couldn't take his eyes off Eli. The poodle tilted its head as if to say, "What are you?" Suddenly, they were going somewhere. Back outside again. Eli was confused. He'd spaced out and stopped listening, missing crucial information. He didn't want to let on, though, so he followed Con's lead and got into the van on the passenger side. They drove away, turned at the end of the block, and returned to the house via the alley. Con muttered about the local homeowners association and the inhumanity of having to park in the back alley, like a lowly tradesperson. They got out of the van again, and Eli silently vowed that he would try harder to pay attention to everything. He walked right into a kid, knocking them both down. The little boy laughed and jumped right up. He reached his hand down for Eli, grinning madly as if being accidentally tackled was the best thing that could have happened to him that morning. "My name's Joey," the kid said. "You played basketball? There's a hoop at the end of this block, but I don't have a ball, so I'd just throw rocks at the hoop." Eli introduced himself and Con as he looked over the kid. Joey looked about 7 or 8, wore mismatched shoes, grimy clothes, and smelled like he needed a bath. "I wish I had a basketball with me," Eli said. "I'd play with you if I could, but we're here to do a job." "For Mrs. Peters?" Joey ran ahead of them and jumped up on the fence to open the back gate. "What are you doing? Can I help? You look like you're from the army, but that's not an army truck. It's a plumber's van. Are you here to fix a toilet?" Con snorted at the idea. "Kid, we're not plumbers. We're more like knights, here to vanquish something Mrs. Peters doesn't need." Joey unlatched the gate and swung it open, his body draped over the top. "Like a monster?" A dog barked sharply. Sitting near Eli's feet was the same brown, rat-sized dog they'd seen as they were driving up. The dog barked again, like it was giving an order to the kid. Joey dropped down from the wooden gate, ripping his T-shirt along the way. "Shut up, Nigel," he said to the dog. "I didn't tell them anything." The dog growled. "Never mind my dog, Nigel," Joey said. "He never lets me do anything." Joey walked toward them, his arms outstretched. "Those bags look heavy. Let me carry something. I can help." Con dug into one of his cargo pants pockets and held out $10. "Go buy some candy." The kid didn't seem interested in the money. "I don't like candy." "But girls like candy," Con said. "You buy the candy to bribe the girls, so they'll have to kiss you. And—" Eli interrupted with, "Thanks for the offer, Joey, but the work we do isn't appropriate for kids." The dog barked again, as if in agreement. Con shook the cash offering at the kid. Joey silently took the $10 with a limp arm, then turned and walked away with his head and shoulders slumping forward at the perfect angle to emote maximum sadness. Eli stared after him, wishing he could do more for the kid. He was probably homeschooled, which explained why he was around on a weekday while other kids his age were at school. Con whistled to get Eli's attention. "Pull yourself together." Con was already at the back door of the house, gesturing for Eli to hurry up. Eli trotted up the back walkway and entered through the open doorway. They walked through an interior porch into a sunny-looking kitchen. The same shade of bright yellow that was on the home's exterior walls colored the kitchen's tile backsplash. Carla Peters swept up the last remnants of broken dishes, her white curls bouncing, then tapped the dustpan into the garbage. "As you boys can see, this ghost is a very naughty boy," she said, sounding more frustrated than terrified. "At first I thought it was cute. He would mix up the labels on my tinned goods, and I'd open up a can of peaches to find baked beans." She chuckled as she hung up the broom and dustpan on the wall hooks next to the refrigerator. "Fine," I thought. "I'll have baked beans for breakfast instead of peaches." Con set his big bag on the floor and started looking around the room. "Has the spirit attempted to harm you?" Someone who was not Carla answered the question. "Not yet, but it's becoming more of a nuisance. It's not part of our plan." Eli looked around to see who'd spoken inside his head. It was only the three of them, and Carla's miniature poodle in the kitchen. The dog gave Eli a long, deliberate stare, as if to say, "Do your job quickly, and go home to your revolting cat." "I don't have a cat," Eli thought. "You stink of cat." The exchange between Eli and the poodle was interrupted by Carla offering them miniature cocktail wieners from a can. "Sure," Eli said. Con elbowed him. "She was talking to the dog. Come on, let's go check the other rooms." They excused themselves and left the kitchen to check the other rooms. When they reached the living room, a tingle ran up and down Eli's back. "Did you feel that?" Con asked. "The disturbance is following us." Eli stopped walking and looked around. The living room looked normal enough, and so did the floral-patterned sofas with doilies on the armrests. The coffee table held 5 different remote controls, which wasn't unusual, and a levitating candy dish, which was unusual, but not entirely unexpected. Eli nudged Con and nodded toward the candy dish. Con said in a deep, theatrical voice, "I think I'll have some delicious hard candy." He slowly reached forward. When his fingertips grazed the edge of the glass bowl, the dish suddenly flew up into the air. The bowl began to twirl, whipping hard candies around the room. Eli held his ground, trying to appear brave on the surface, while that tingle in his spine moved down and began bodily production of that no good omen, crack sweat. "Not bad," Con said to the unseen entity, "but candy dishes only weigh a couple of pounds." He turned to Eli and gave him a sly smile. "We're dealing with an itty-bitty baby para-electrical element." He nodded for Eli to continue the conversation. Eli reached up and removed the chunk of candy that had lodged in his ear. He remembered what Con had said at their previous job about poltergeists trying to impress paraprofessionals such as themselves. "You're right, boss," Eli said. "Candy isn't very heavy. I suppose I could be more impressed than this." The air in the room shifted temperature dramatically, dropping down to a point chilly enough to make Eli's breath come out as a fog. "Wow," Eli said, as he admired the visible plumes of his breath. "Don't be impressed," Con snapped. "That's nothing. The itty-bitty baby is only doing that parlor trick because it can't lift a sofa." Something in the room creaked. Eli was so busy admiring his foggy breath, he didn't see a floral print sofa flying toward his head. Chapter 4. The flying sofa easily tackled Eli Carter to the floor, and the addition of the second flying sofa kept him there. Everything went dark for Eli, flat on the room's carpet and covered in a pyramid of furniture. "Oh dear, oh dear," he heard Mrs. Carla Peters say. "Is your partner okay?"
"I'm alive,"
Eli answered, his voice muffled by throw pillows and doilies. Con bellowed at the woman. "Ma'am, for your own safety, please exit the premises."
oh dear,"
he heard her say before opening and slamming shut the front door. It took Eli a few seconds to tell which way was up. He wiggled like a worm and determined he was on his stomach. He continued to wiggle, moving toward a triangle of light. "Is that all you've got?" Con bellowed. Eli tried to wiggle faster, spurred on by Con's taunting words. The weight above him got heavier, though. More objects were being added to the pile atop him. Now he couldn't move at all. Worse still, he realized that the encouraging cries coming from Con were meant for the poltergeist, not Eli. Con clapped and squealed with the unfettered joy of a child at a magic show, calling out for more things to be piled on top of the pyramid. This went on for 3 minutes and 20 seconds, though it felt like, to Eli, at least 10 minutes. Finally, the sounds of objects hurtling onto the pile ceased. Eli listened to the sound of their bags of gear being pulled from the pyramid and then unzipped. A pillow dislodged, revealing a crack of light in front of Eli. He used his nose to widen the crack enough for him to see into the living room, which looked strangely empty now that all the furniture was on top of him. He could see Con moving around the room, arranging 5 black objects in a circular formation. These were the hexapods, now named pentapods, because they were down to 5. Eli spat carpet fibers out of his mouth, then said, "Gah!" Con replied, "Can you wait about 5 minutes? We don't have long." "Well, that depends. What happens in 5 minutes?" Con chuckled. "You'll have to stop goofing around in your blanket fort." Eli groaned, then watched as Con flicked on the switches at the bottom of each pentapod. Just like during the first demonstration, a soft hum filled the room. The hum was soothing, like the sound Eli imagined a crystal cavern might make as a breeze whirled through. Con pulled a metallic cube from his pocket, held it to the key he wore on a chain around his neck, then set it at the center of the pentapods. He got to his feet and left the room, then returned a moment later with a porcelain clown figurine. He held the figurine in the center of the arrangement, where it sparkled in the middle of the miniature fireworks show. "Cross your fingers this works," Con said. "I would, if I could move my fingers." "Some help you are." "I should have seen that couch coming. Who doesn't see a couch? I don't know if you've noticed this, but I have an issue with focus." Eli sighed. "Ooh, lemon drop." He stretched out his tongue and snagged the yellow hard candy. Con jumped to his feet. "Bada boom!" He dropped the creepy clown figurine unceremoniously and began punching the air. Eli held his breath, not sure if that was Con's victory response or the beginning of the next round of battle. He felt the weight above him lessening. It's over? He asked. You got the you-know-what into the trap? Of course I did. I'm a professional. Con pulled off more furniture until Eli could crawl his way out. Eli surveyed the damage in the living room. Except for a few scratches on the wall next to where he'd been imprisoned, the room didn't look too bad. He checked the D6 cube. It was heavier than the empty ones, so he had to believe Con had captured the poltergeist. Good job, boss, he said. Con shrugged. If you say so. Working together, Con and Eli began putting the room back in order. Sorry I was useless, Eli said. Don't say that. You served your purpose. Somebody needed to tire out the para-electrical element, so it would need to rest in its chosen vessel. Trapping them when they're airborne is nearly impossible. Con patted him on the back. You did your part. Eli crunched the remainder of the lemon drop he'd been enjoying. If you say so, he said glumly. He turned to pick up the remote controls from the floor. Stop moping. Eli snorted. He wasn't moping, or so he thought. He didn't realize it, but as he moved around the living room, he slumped his head and shoulders at the perfect angle to emote maximum sadness. Con left and went next door to retrieve their client. Eli picked up the unwrapped hard candies, returned most of them to the candy bowl, then wiped 2 off on his shirt and popped them into his mouth. Mrs. Carla Peters returned with Con, her white poodle obediently at her side. She excused herself for a minute to get her checkbook. We take checks? Eli asked. Con shook his head. Val is nice, too. Don't worry, though. If someone bounces a check, we can always bounce something else right back. He tossed the gleaming cube in the air, juggling it between 2 hands. The poodle, who stayed in the room to keep an eye on them, let out a sharp bark, as if to say, Don't you dare. Eli replied to the dog, Don't worry, he'd only do that if the check bounced. Con tucked the D6 away. Who are you talking to? Eli pointed to the dog, who was giving them both a suspicious look. Or was it? Poodles always looked suspicious to Eli, especially the tiny ones. Perhaps they were wondering who shrunk them to be so small, with their brains the size of walnuts. The dog narrowed its eyes at Eli, as if to say, Size isn't what you think it is, jelly brains. Mrs. Carla Peters returned with a check. Thank you, boys. Now that my gremlin is gone, I hope the internet'll finally start working properly. Con's posture stiffened, and his hand froze mid-reach for the check. Ma'am, you have a gremlin? She waved her hand. Whatever you call it, polka ghost, the polka ghost that was messing up my kitchen. Con took the check, letting out his breath audibly. That's poltergeist, and yes, we caught it. If you're having problems with your internet, I suggest you call tech support. I'll do that, she said. Leave me some of your cards, just in case. Con handed the woman a dozen business cards. Then they gathered their bags of equipment and left by the back door. On the way back to the van, Eli started to ask Con if gremlins were real, but stopped when he saw the little boy Joey sitting in the alley shuffling with a deck of cards. Want to see a magic trick? Joey asked. Sure, Eli said. The kid looked down at the deck of cards and muttered, Sorry, I don't know any magic tricks. Con groaned and picked up the deck of cards. These are dirty, he grumbled. Pick a card. Joey pulled a card from the fanned deck and showed it to Eli. The 3 of diamonds. He slid the card back in without letting Con see it. Con shuffled the deck like a professional and then opened up one of his cargo pants pockets and put the deck away. You shouldn't play with cards, kid, he said. Next you'll be gambling. He patted his pocket. Trust me, this is for your own good. Joey started to yell, demanding his cards back. He started off playful but got more angry, coming at Con with his arms windmilling. Con held him back with one palm on Joey's forehead, then turned to Eli and calmly said, It's for his own good.
Give him his cards back.
Con's dark green eyes danced. Make me.
Con, give Joey his cards.
Come get them. There are two of you. It's 2 against 1. Come on, tough guys. Eli tried to reach for the cargo pocket, but Con blocked his moves easily. Even with a coordinated effort between Eli and Joey, they couldn't get to the cards. Finally, Eli took a step back and said to Joey, "Never mind. I'll give you another $10 and you can buy 2 decks of cards. I'm sorry my boss is such a—" Eli looked down at the object in his hand. He'd reached for his wallet, but pulled out a deck of cards. The 3 of diamonds was visible on top. Joey screamed with delight and snatched the deck from Eli's hands.
"That's the best magic trick I've ever seen,"
Joey yelled. "It sure is," Con said. "Now scram, kid. I'm sure your mother is wondering where you are."
"Nah, my mother is—"
Joey's dog started barking wildly.
"Shut up, Nigel,"
Joey yelled. The dog refused to shut up, though. Within seconds, other dogs up and down the street joined in, creating an unholy chorus of yelping. Eli noticed something big and white moving. His van. Con was already pulling away, though at least he'd had the courtesy to push the passenger side door open. Eli waved goodbye to Joey and ran down the alley after his ride, his growls of annoyance lost in the sea of barking. Chapter 5. After driving for a while, Con said, "You probably don't have any workout clothes with you."
"No,"
Eli said brightly.
"I guess we can't go to the gym for lunch after all."
Con took his eyes off the road long enough to admire his flexed bicep. "We did move a lot of furniture.
Plus, it's Wednesday."
"What does that have to do with anything? Are you part of some religion that doesn't work out on Wednesdays?"
"You could say that."
"You're being smug again, Eli."
"This is just how my face looks."
He pointed to a store up ahead.
"Park right here. That's a good comic shop, and Wednesday's the day new comics show up."
Con muttered under his breath that if comics were so great, there'd be new ones every day. But he did pull the van over and park. Eli patted his pockets. He felt like he was forgetting something. "Here." Con handed Eli back his wallet, presumably lifted from him during the magic card trick. They stepped out of the van and walked up to the comic shop's glass door. Their reflections showed they were the same height, which surprised Eli. Eli paused at the door, savoring the moment. Not only was he about to get his hands on the week's new comics, he would get to introduce Con to people. Eli didn't have a huge circle of friends, but the social life he did have revolved around comic shops and their scheduled events. If his buddies in the store were half as impressed with Con as Eli was, they would be very impressed indeed. Eli pulled open the door and waved for his cool, muscular, confident, funky-haired friend to enter first, all the better to make an impression. Con didn't even glance left or right. He walked in a straight line directly to the graphic novels, picked one up at random, and began reading. Eli followed and waved hello to the store owner. Jason Dean, or J.D. to all the regulars, sat on a stool behind the counter, eating a brick of uncooked ramen noodles while discussing his favorite comic franchise and a decades-old film option that had yet to result in a movie. J.D. sputtered to another store regular, sending crunchy ramen fragments across the counter. "Yet they keep rebooting the same ones. No imagination. I wish I was 8 years old again, because that's who they're catering the entire industry to." The customer replied, "But the talking animals are almost enjoyable. The CG these days is almost decent. I went to the theater 3 times to see—" J.D. slammed his fist on the counter. "You're part of the problem. You keep handing them your money. Hey, Eli, can I get you anything? No? You good?
Anyway, you keep giving them fistfuls of money for unoriginal dreck, and now you're feeding the monster, making it bigger.
Eli didn't stick around to hear the rest of the conversation. He heard it all before. Normally, he'd jump into the debate, discussing the derivative versus the divine, and all the enjoyable crap in between. But he didn't want to fly all his geek flags at once in front of Con. He walked his usual route between the racks, checking his auto-buy series first, and moving down to the maybes. He kept expecting for Con to come over and say he was bored, but Con seemed transfixed by the graphic novels, unlike Brenda, whose interest waned after 15 minutes on a good day. After an hour of contented browsing, Eli walked toward the counter with his stack of comics. Con was already at the counter, making a purchase from J.D. Eli caught no more than a glimpse of Con's books as J.D. packed them into one of the store's signature bright orange bags.
"Getting into some graphic novels?"
Eli asked. Con must not have heard the question over the rattle of the cash register, because he grabbed the bag and walked out of the store without even a glance back at Eli. J.D. turned to Eli, a sneer on his lips, and said,
"Let's all pray that guy's not armed to the teeth. Am I right?"
Eli replayed the last hour in his head. Short of arriving at the same time, there'd been no clue he was with Con, and now it was too late to say anything. J.D. took Eli's stack of comics and started ringing them up, pausing to judge each selection, the way he always did. Eli leaned over to peer between the posters covering the store's windows. Con headed toward the van, got into the passenger side, took a graphic novel out of his orange bag, and started reading. The customer who'd been at the comic shop counter when they'd arrived was still there, leaning in the exact same spot. He was also looking out the window at Con.
"I think I went to school with that white-haired dude," the guy said. "He had a crazy dad. I felt sorry for him, but then I met his sister."
He used both hands to mime a representation of Valentine that was reasonably accurate.
"That dude used to have brown hair. Then one day it just turned white. He must have seen something scary. I hear that happens."
"Something scary?"
J.D. said, still sneering.
"I can tell you it wasn't in a movie theater. Those suits in Hollywood haven't made a movie that's actually scary since—"
Eli walked out with his purchases, glad to miss the rest of the conversation. He felt funny about the whole interaction and hearing about Con from another person. He got into the van.
"Con, the customer at the counter said he went to school with you."
"He did."
Con didn't look up from his graphic novel.
"He said your hair just turned white one day."
"It did."
"Because you saw something scary?"
"You went to high school, Eli. Did a day ever go by that you didn't see something scary?"
Eli thought about it. Con wasn't wrong. After a minute, Con tossed the van keys into Eli's lap.
"Time to drive, my man. Val sent us a new job for the afternoon. Brace yourself, because it's a shocker."
He paused for dramatic effect.
"It's a poltergeist, and it's 2 blocks east of this morning's job."
"That is a shock, huh? Where's that D6 from this morning?"
Con gasped.
"Eli, are you suggesting I released the poltergeist we caught this morning just so I could re-experience the thrill of seeing you lose a battle to a doily-covered sofa? I'm deeply offended."
"What's the address?"
Con put on a pair of sunglasses, then held up his arm, which had the morning's address crossed out and a new one written above it in blue pen ink. Eli nodded and put on the van's turn signal. Chapter 6. The second call of the day was to a blue house that looked no different from its neighbors, except for the closed curtains. They parked in the back alley, adhering to the neighborhood association's rules. The owner, a middle-aged man who worked from home, let them into his house while apologizing for the mess. According to the man, Someone or something had spread a layer of coffee grounds over the living room's carpet just moments before the ghost hacker's arrival. Khan slowly removed his sunglasses while commenting, "It looks like someone's laid out the welcome mat." Eli crouched to admire the poltergeist's handiwork with the coffee grounds. He was impressed by the evenness of the distribution. The poltergeist certainly had focus and imagination. The homeowner's dog, a wee dachshund, walked around the living room, leaving dog footprints and sniffing the coffee grounds. The dog looked up at Eli with coffee grounds stuck adorably to its nose. His big brown eyes seemed to say, "This poltergeist has control issues." Khan talked to the homeowner about their services using official-sounding terms like ion boosts, para-electrical elements, and secure yet humane six-walled containment mechanisms that come with a one-time environmental levy of an additional fee that's cash only. The man agreed to the extra fees and begged them to get started.
"I have a programming job to finish," he said. "I wouldn't mind the coffee grounds and toothpaste pranks so much, but I can't work without a reliable internet connection. It's like someone is sucking up the bandwidth for the whole neighborhood."
"We'll take care of it right away. Guaranteed," Khan said with confidence. The man scooped up the wee dachshund and lovingly dusted the coffee grounds off her shiny nose.
"We have to take care of my little Nina," he cooed at the dog. Yes, we do, my wubby-dubby, my little surprise visitor."
Khan maintained a stony face through the dog coddling, then said, "For your own safety, I'll need you both to leave the house, sir." The man gave him a skeptical look, then shrugged and left with the dog. Once they were alone and standing in the living room, Khan said, "Eli, what would you say these coffee grounds weigh?"
"Not very much, Khan."
The air in the room dropped in temperature. Eli smiled. Things were about to get interesting. Khan taunted the poltergeist, talking about the weights of objects within the room. Eli kept smiling and fantasizing about money. Maybe these jobs could be easy enough to do 2 per day. Keeping one eye on the room's leather sofa, which was still grounded, Eli explored the living room. He walked toward what he assumed was a flat-screen television running a screensaver of a fish tank. He leaned in to admire the realistic piranhas swimming back and forth on what he still assumed was a recorded video. Eli's limited amount of attention was already partly diverted to keeping a lookout for the sofa that could be soon flying at his head, so he didn't notice the access panel above the in-wall fish tank open. Nor did he notice the hungry piranhas flying through the air at him. The razor-sharp teeth sinking into his buttocks were a complete shock. Eli sprung into action and did what he could to fight the piranha attack. His efforts were not helped by his concern for the welfare of the innocent fish, for instead of tossing them to the ground and crushing them under his boots, he kept carefully returning the piranhas to their tank. Khan grabbed a decorative bowl from the room's coffee table, dumped out the balls made of twigs, and tossed the bowl to Eli. "Use this like a shield," he yelled. Eli backed away from the fish tank and held up his makeshift shield, just in time to block a torrent of water flying out of the tank with the force of a fire hose. He fought valiantly, but he couldn't win. He staggered under blasts of water and twirled at dizzying speeds, deflecting airborne piranhas. The best he could hope for was to tire the ghost out. Eventually, the poltergeist did lift up the leather sectional and use it to crush Eli into the wet, dirty carpet. In the darkness, Eli let out a sigh of relief. Being under a pyramid of furniture wasn't so bad. Something sank its teeth into Eli's calf. On second thought, being trapped anywhere with a school of riled-up piranhas was pretty bad. Once the day's second poltergeist had been successfully imprisoned, Khan removed the furniture and released Eli. They worked quickly to return the surviving piranhas to their quarter-full tank. The room was a disaster, but the client was happy and paid them cash for the job.
"I've been meaning to pull up that carpet anyway," the man said. "Of course, I'll pull down the area rug so my precious little Nina doesn't slip around when she's doing her tricks."
The homeowner cradled his dog lovingly as he walked them out the back door. Con said, "Thank you for calling in paraprofessionals. I'm glad you didn't attempt to do this on your own. These disturbances are never DIY problems." He handed over a stack of business cards. They finished saying goodbye, then got to the van. Eli opened the first aid kit and was pleasantly surprised to find actual first aid supplies. "Valentine stocked that," Con explained.
My piranha bites certainly appreciate her efforts.
Eli took out some bandages and examined the damage. They'd broken his skin in a few spots, but luckily for Eli, the bites weren't deep. "It's a real shame we can't record video of these jobs," Con said.
For a documentary? Sure, we should do that. The world should know that ghosts are real, especially if people are in danger.
Too bad we can't. I wish I could see the look on your face again when you turned around and saw a piranha nibbling on your butt. That was priceless.
It was memorable.
He held the client's wad of cash toward Eli. "Here, you keep this. I already got paid in entertainment value." Eli kept dabbing antibacterial ointment on his lacerations, not accepting the cash.
Don't you have to take off payroll taxes and stuff?
Con took back the money and tucked it in his pocket. "Sure, we'll go the official way. Is that you talking or your smugness chip?"
Well, I don't know,
Eli said, which was the truth. He didn't know, and likely never would. They were back on the topic of his chip again, which he didn't like. He couldn't lie, but he could change the topic.
I couldn't see this time. What did the second poltergeist hide inside of? Where'd you catch it?
Second poltergeist? So you don't think I released the first one to double our earnings?
This one was different. I could tell. It had a different sort of energy. It's hard to explain, but it was more of a jerk than the first one.
Very good, Eli. Con sorted through the first aid kit, sorting the bandages by size. After you wore this one out with the piranhas and furniture, it went to rest inside a set of Russian nesting dolls. Super creepy.
Oh, nesting dolls. All the little ones inside the big one. That's really obvious. So creepy.
Someone tapped on the murky plastic covering the van's passenger side window, making them both jump in alarm. It was the kid, Joey, still in the dirty clothes he'd been wearing that morning. Eli pulled at the tape holding up the plastic and opened the window for conversation.
Hey, Joey, we just finished up another job. How's your day going, little dude?
Joey's small fingers curled around the bottom edge of the window opening. He stood on his toes to peer into the van. Eli quickly finished applying the bandage to his arm to hide the blood.
You got comics?
Joey asked excitedly, having spotted the orange bags. Eli looked over at Con, who simply shrugged, as if to say, You worked hard today. Now go ahead and show the kid your new comics, you big geek. Chapter 7. On Thursday, there were more poltergeists on the agenda. Con and Eli returned to the same quiet suburban neighborhood for the first of 2 jobs, both on the same street. Eli's muscles ached from the previous day's activities, but the anticipation of more supernatural battles invigorated him. It helped that he thought of them as supernatural battles, and not getting hit with things. They walked into the home of that morning's client, where Eli gave the living room a stern glaring over for sharp objects. Con prepared the elderly homeowner by talking up their services, plus the new environmental fee surcharge, then sent her and her little dog out of the house for safety. Eli stood in front of the room's heavy-looking bookshelves, watching as the poltergeist playfully nudged books out of alignment at the edges of his vision. He took out his phone to take a video for Brenda's benefit, but as soon as the phone was out, the ghostly rearranging stopped. "Now you're shy?" Eli asked the ghost.
That's not very impressive. I was hoping to get some footage to show my girlfriend.
Con walked toward the door to the kitchen, calling over his shoulder,
"That won't work, my man. They have their rules."
Eli followed him to the kitchen, which looked the same as the suburban kitchens they'd seen in the previous day's houses, except for an unfortunate pink and red spattered wallpaper, which gave the otherwise charming suburban kitchen the appearance of a slaughterhouse.
"Oh,"
Eli said.
"Well, that wallpaper scared me."
Con went to the cookie jar on the counter and began investigating some chocolate chip cookies with his mouth. Eli felt a tickle at the back of his neck. The poltergeist was in the room with them. Con munched cookies and frowned at the wallpaper.
"You're right. That is the worst wallpaper I've ever seen. It would be an impossible job to remove it, though. Impossible."
"Well, not really," Eli answered. "Brenda watches a lot of those home improvement shows. You scratch the wallpaper surface with a tool, then rent a steamer to—"
He stopped talking, mouth agape, and watched as the poltergeist peeled a strip of wallpaper down the wall. Con gave him a knowing look and poured himself a glass of milk to go with the cookies. After a few minutes of wallpaper shredding, Eli said,
"I'm still not clear on the procedures, and I want to do a good job while minimizing bodily damage."
The poltergeist kept working on the wallpaper, but only the easy spots where it was already loose. Whenever the paper tore, the mischievous spirit moved over to another easy spot. Eli frowned at the mess of wallpaper.
"So how do we do this?"
"We do this like the devil puts on trousers,"
Con replied.
"One leg at a time?"
Con raised his dark eyebrows in response. Eli guessed again.
"With style?"
No, that wasn't it. Eli ventured a third guess.
"Does the devil put on trousers quickly so he can go for lunch, or—"
Eli's fourth guess was cut off by a flying V formation of books, raining down on him like he was a trash can fire that needed smothering. The books from the living room. He hadn't expected that. Even under the mountain of paperbacks and hardcover editions, Eli could hear Con say,
"The devil puts on his trousers with one eye over his shoulder, Eli. Gah! He's always watching out for the woman's husband, who might come home unexpectedly." "Good one,"
Eli groaned. After the hardcovers, the poltergeist moved on to paperbacks. Eli let out plenty of groans, which encouraged the ghost to try harder. It eventually ran out of books and piled on all the food from the pantry. Once the immature spirit had tired itself out, it went to rest inside a handmade teapot. Con set up the pentapods and extracted it without any damage to the teapot. The owner was very grateful and gave them a tip on top for their fee. They finished packing up, skipped lunch, and went straight to the second job. The second job of the day, which was Eli's fourth poltergeist, went so smoothly even Con seemed surprised. As they did their best to tidy up the disaster at the day's second job, Con said,
"Para-electrical elements really have a thing for you. I've never seen anything like it. They're attracted to everything about you. They love you."
Eli turned upright the reclining chair he'd briefly worn as a hat.
"Well, that figures. My whole life I've had trouble making friends with regular people, and now it turns out I'm a freak magnet."
"Are you calling me a freak?"
Eli sought the words to apologize for what he'd implied, but Con quickly added,
"Don't answer that. I know I'm a freak, and that's okay."
Con wiped some sweat from his brow with the back of his hand and briefly looked just vulnerable enough for Eli to get a squishy feeling in his chest. Con felt like a misfit, just like him. They weren't so different after all. Eli got another squishy feeling, like he wanted to hug Con. He clenched his jaw until the unmanly feeling passed. The doorbell rang. It was the client, checking to see if the job was finished. While Con let the client back in and arranged for payment, Eli opened the room's curtains. A crowd of neighbors had gathered on the front lawn, and they craned their necks to peer in. At least half of them were frowning at Eli, suspicion in their eyes. He could hear a few snippets of their conversation through the closed window, but only the voices that were angry enough to be loud. One man said,
"It's like those glass repair shops who throw bricks through people's windows when business is slow."
Another woman ranted about an investigation and getting some reporters down here. A surly-looking man the size and shape of a refrigerator rapped on the window's glass.
"Where are your credentials?" he demanded.
Eli started to pull the curtains shut again, but paused when he noticed the little boy, Joey, standing in the crowd. Joey was holding Nigel in his arms so the rat dog didn't get crushed in the crowd, but he could still move one hand enough to wave hello to Eli. Joey said something, possibly about comics, but Eli couldn't hear him over the angry crowd. Con had finished with the client and thrust a bag of gear into Eli's arms.
"We're paid up. We're done."
"Did you hand out business cards?" Con was already on his way toward the back door. Eli waved goodbye to Joey through the window, then ran after his boss. On Friday morning, bruised and weary from muscle soreness, Eli stumbled into the kitchenette at Ghost Hackers and went straight for the box of pastries. He was raising a jelly donut to his mouth when the Hart siblings walked in, and Valentine said, "Smash off!" He wasn't expecting a smash-off and didn't flex his wrist fast enough. Valentine won the smash-off by squishing jelly up his nostril. "You win," he said.
"You're a cheater,"
Con said, admonishing his sister. "I won that fair and square." She ate her donut with a charming combination of dainty grace and tomboyish carelessness. Eli gazed in admiration, training his eyes on the area above her neckline. He didn't dare let his gaze drop down to Valentine's dangerous curves. "She's just a co-worker," he told himself. "Just a human being, normal human stuff. Half the population is female. Some are tall, some are short, some have narrow waists, curvy hips, long legs. All those things are none of your business," he said in his head. Eli kept his gaze above the danger line. He watched as Valentine finished the donut, then licked her fingers. She put one finger at a time into her mouth and sucked off the jelly and powdered sugar. With each lick, Eli's body became more numb until he felt like he was no longer in his body or in this room. Con elbowed him and said,
"What's on your mind, my man?"
Eli opened his mouth and told them exactly what he'd been thinking about while watching pretty Valentine lick her fingers. He couldn't stop himself. Out came the truth. What he revealed on that Friday morning in the kitchenette of Ghost Hackers was so horrifying, his own ears blocked him from hearing the words. To Eli, it was as if a loud beep filled the room, bleeping out what he was saying. This had happened to him before, twice. Both times he had been daydreaming in a classroom. The pretty brunette teacher he had a crush on had asked him what he was daydreaming about. Without thinking, young Eli responded truthfully. He had no idea what exact words he'd said, because the bleep filled his head then as it did now. However, the shocked look on his teacher's face, plus the ensuing laughter from his classmates, told him everything he needed to know. Now, as Valentine lowered her hand from her moist, full, sensual lips, the look on her face told Eli that if Ghost Hackers had a principal's office, he'd be getting sent there right now. Once the bleeping sound stopped, Eli clenched his teeth together tightly and waited for something to hit him. He fully expected his face to reacquaint itself with Con's fist. But the fist didn't come, nor did the relative relief of crumpling over in physical agony. Instead, there was only awkward silence. Finally, Valentine said, "And on that note, here's your paycheck." She didn't hand him the envelope, though. She stepped back and set it on the room's small table, as though handing Eli an envelope directly would be too much of an invitation for depravity. "I'm sorry," he said through gritted teeth. "That's the chip in my brain." She kept backing away, but slowly.
The chip makes you do things? Con was telling the truth about that?
"Yes. Well, please don't stick my head in a microwave," she snorted.
Not without modifications.
Eli didn't know what to say to that, so he kept apologizing.
Don't sweat it, Eli, she said. It's actually refreshing to be around someone as honest as you. Her eyes twinkled as a smile curved her lips. I'll try to be more careful about how I eat donuts from now on.
"That probably won't help," Eli said, which was true. She darted forward, plucked another donut from the box, then made a hasty retreat back to her workshop. Chapter 8. Valentine scheduled them for 3 jobs on Friday, all poltergeists, all within blocks of each other. They gathered up the basic equipment, including the restocked first aid kit. They were running low on bandages, thanks to the piranhas and a few other things. The poltergeists were juveniles, according to Con, so most of Eli's injuries were accidental. Con seemed preoccupied as he jotted the addresses on his arm. Eli assumed it was because of what he'd said to Valentine. They walked out to the van, where Eli got into the driver's seat. He braced himself, expecting the chewing out to happen now that they were alone in the van. He started driving to the job site. To Eli's relief, once on the road, Con didn't bring up the topic of that morning's interactions with Valentine. Instead, he regaled Eli with tales of his previous night's celebrations at a strip club. As the stories continued, Eli allowed himself to relax. Whatever he'd said during the bleep couldn't be worse than a single descriptive sentence from Con's strip club stories. Eli didn't interrupt Con's ping-pong story because he didn't want to compete over who'd had the best night, but his own Thursday night had been better than average. Brenda had cooked another meatloaf made of dead cow and served it with mashed potatoes. He'd had 2 full servings, which, when it came to Brenda's cooking, was 1.5 servings more than he usually wanted. They arrived at the address and parked behind the house like plumbers. For a moment, they just sat in the quiet van, neither making the first move to start the day. "Friday," Eli said. Con grumbled about being hungover, and Eli silently rubbed his sore shoulder. In addition to the piranha bites, which were healing up nicely, Eli's body was covered in bruises. He wondered what color the bruise on his tailbone currently was, and he wondered if every color had a name. He couldn't think of an alternate name for the color of a bruise. The color of a bruise wasn't green or gray or purple, but something that was all of those things, plus a bit of yellow. The interior of the van was eerily quiet. Con had stopped talking. Eli's mind had been wandering through the bruise rainbow, and now he wasn't sure if they were still talking about the local liquor and stripper economy, or if that conversation was over. "Good times," Eli said, which was one of his stock responses for when he hadn't been paying attention. "Good times," Con agreed. Eli peeked under a bandage on his forearm. His piranha bite had scabbed over, and the surrounding tissue looked healthy, but bruised-colored. Brenda had been surprised the bites weren't worse, but figured the airborne piranhas may have been stunned and not at their best. She also said Eli was her big, strong hero, and it was her duty to play nurse and kiss everything better. "Triple header today," Con said. "I guess we should get to work." Eli looked down at the first aid kit on the floor between the bucket seats. "We're out of bandages. These are the last ones." "I'll pick some up on the weekend," Con said. "On Sunday. I plan to sleep all day Saturday." "We're not working through the weekend? I thought you said Valentine had our docket booked solid for days and days." "The jobs can wait. I don't work weekends. No overtime if I can help it. The business has to serve you, not the other way around." "I just thought—" Eli let the news wash over him in waves, disintegrating the sandcastles of his weekend plans.
Glumly, he said, "I thought I was going to get out of shopping with Brenda at the Container Store."
You would rather have couches dropped on your head?
"It's not just the Container Store." Eli patted his pocket, where he had his first week's paycheck safely tucked away. "She's got a whole shopping plan." After opening the envelope that morning, he'd made the mistake of sending the total to Brenda, who'd gotten more than a little excited. Even now his phone was vibrating with incoming messages.
You do need a new laptop, Con said. Val says your old one's fried up like pork chops at Grandma's.
"Well, I'm a few paychecks away from a new laptop. We have to upgrade things. There's a list. She says I have to get all new underwear."
What's wrong with your underwear?
Never mind. Con held up his hand, palm out.
I don't want to know.
It was too late, though. Eli had already grabbed the slack waistband of his no longer elasticized underwear and tugged it above the waist of his cargo pants to show Con some of the holes.
Those aren't bad, Con said. They're just getting broken in and comfortable. I bought some in that condition from Diesel a year ago. Still good. He shook his head. She'll probably make you buy tight designer underwear that rides up your crack because she thinks you look like the guy on the box. This is just one more reason I'm glad to be single.
You want me to save my old ones after I'm done shopping?
Con snorted. Yes, Eli, I want to clothe myself in the same fabric that's been cupping your hamsters for the last 3 years.
2 years tops, and I have several pairs. They're in rotation. Con seemed to be reconsidering the offer.
How many pairs?
Someone tapped on the driver's side window where Eli was sitting. It was Joey, looking forlorn in his dirty, ripped clothes. Instead of just rolling down the window, Eli jumped out to greet the little boy who held his rat-like dog, Nigel, in his arms. "I'm glad to see someone's feeding you," Eli said. "You have jam and peanut butter on your face, little man." Nigel's ears pricked up, and he immediately licked the food off Joey's face. A crazy thought popped into Eli's head. The kid's been practicing black magic and turned one of his parents into a small dog. Yes, that would explain why Nigel barked his head off whenever Joey's parents were mentioned. It would also explain why nobody gave the kid a bath. Dogs don't like baths. "I know the secret thing you do," Joey said. "You guys are ghost catchers."
"Yes," Eli admitted.
"Do you do other stuff, too? What did you have in mind, Joey? Is there something you want to tell me?" The rat-faced dog looked up at Eli and tipped his head, as if to say,
"Just keep catching the poltergeists that slip out of the dark grid and mind your own business."
"What?" Eli asked the dog. "Dark grid?" Nigel curled his black lips up over his sharp canines and snarled in response. Joey set the dog down. "Shut up, Nigel." Con came around the van with bags slung over his shoulders.
"What's going on here?" Con asked the kid. "Do you know something about these disturbances? What do you know about para-electrical elements, kid?"
Joey gave a one-shoulder shrug. "Got any more magic tricks?" He didn't wait for a response before darting toward Con, his quick hands plunging into a cargo pocket next to Con's knee. Con held his ground and turned to Eli.
"Another reason I'm glad to be single. No wife, no kids."
Eli gave a wry smile. "You seem kind of defensive about the single life today. Was Brandy with 2 E's putting some pressure on you last night?"
"I'd make a joke about Brandy and the right kind of pressure, but it wouldn't seem right with these little paws digging around in my pockets."
He stepped back, shaking Joey off his legs.
"Enough, kid."
"What's this?" Joey held up an orange flyer retrieved from Con's pocket. "What's a faire?" Eli reached down and grabbed the flyer to take a look. He had a dim memory of getting handed a faire flyer at the comic shop on Wednesday. He explained to Joey, This happens every year in one of the city parks. A Ren Fair is like a circus for geeks." "Why don't they call it a geek circus then?" Con snorted. Eli gave Con a dirty look and did not remind him that the flyer had come from Con's pocket, where it had been since his purchase of very geeky graphic novels. Eli let it go, because he knew that the people who made fun of geeks the loudest were always big geeks themselves, in deep denial. Joey read aloud the bullet points on the flyer. "Costumes, sword fights, games, jousting, prizes. Oh man, this sounds like the best thing ever. Please, please, can I go? I need to go to the Ren Fair. I need to go." "Sure, keep the flyer," Eli said. "You can pick me up on Sunday at noon," Joey said. "I have to ask first, but it'll be fine. Right, Nigel?" He looked down at the little dog, who didn't bark or say anything. Eli said. Joey beamed up at them, his smile radiant within his grimy face. "Thank you, Eli and Con. You're my new best friends. My house is the brown one, 2860. Joey gave Eli a hug around the legs and then quickly turned and ran off at top speed, the orange Ren Fair flyer clutched in his fist. The dog bounded at his side, little tail whipping happily. "Impressive," Con commented while staring after the boy and his dog. "You have to admire his technique. Do you think I can bump up today's fees by hugging people and saying they're my new best friends?" "Did that just happen? Am I taking Joey to a Ren Fair on Sunday?" "Come by Ghost Hackers in the morning, and we'll install a bench in the van so you have more than 2 seats. Con nodded for Eli to follow him toward the client's house for their first job of the day. "We'll bring Val with us so the kids' parents don't feel so weird about sending their 8-year-old off with 2 guys in a van." They reached the back door. Con knocked, then turned to Eli and asked, "How much could we sell a kid like that for, do you think? Hypothetically." Eli grinned. He was beyond excited about going to the Ren Fair with Con and Valentine, now that the plans had been made. This Sunday was going to be the best Sunday ever. "We'd have to give him a bath and a makeover," Eli said jokingly. "That is, if we want to get top dollar at the child buyer auction." The woman who'd just opened the back door in time to hear Eli talk about auctioning children gasped in horror. Con said to her gruffly, "Don't worry, ma'am. We also take cash if you're out of children." "He's joking," Eli said quickly, "but not about the cash. I need money to buy underwear so I can give my old underwear to him." He winced at the words coming out of his mouth, but was unable to stop them. The horror of that morning's bleep-out was causing aftershocks of oversharing. Eli continued, the words pouring out. "He's my boss. His sister is very pretty, but I'm not supposed to think about her like that. I have a girlfriend. Her name's Brenda. She was the first girl I ever—" Con grabbed Eli by the shoulders and shook him until he stopped babbling. "Never mind, my brother," Con said smoothly. "I'm afraid Eli suffered a childhood illness that rendered him an idiot. Brenda is his dog. I apologize on his behalf. He can't do much, but he's an excellent decoy for the ghosts. Isn't that right, Eli?" "My name's Eli." Con stopped shaking him and ruffled Eli's hair with one hand. "Sweet, simple Eli. He does have a natural talent with the para-electrical elements." Eli beamed with pride because he couldn't help it. Today he would be pummeled, lacerated, and humiliated, but he had a natural talent for something. Plus, he was going to the Ren Fair on Sunday. Chapter 9. Con and Eli worked straight through lunch again. The work wasn't what any sane person would call easy, but there was a satisfaction to doing it. And Eli was naturally talented with ghosts. He decided it was because kids had always been drawn to him, and poltergeists were like the kid version of ghosts, with all their games and pranks. At the third and final house, Con straightened the artwork that hadn't been destroyed by the disturbance, while Eli peered warily through the curtains. A crowd of curious onlookers had been following them from house to house, and a dozen people now stood or sat on the front lawn.
"I've got a bad feeling about this neighborhood," Eli said. "Shouldn't we be reporting this to some authorities?"
Sure, you go ahead and make the call to report a massive outbreak of poltergeists. Be sure and mention the voices you've been hearing in your head from the little dogs talking to you. Go ahead, my man. Call the number.
"Not funny,"
Eli grumbled. He stayed at the window, counting up the dogs on the front lawn. There were almost as many dogs as people, about 10, and all of them were the same size as Joey's Chihuahua. There was something odd about the dogs, besides the fact that Eli kept hearing them talking in his head. They were all the same size, but some appeared to be breeds that Eli hadn't known came in miniature versions. He narrowed his eyes at the miniature St. Bernard, as if to say, "You make no sense, miniature St. Bernard who shouldn't exist." The dog cocked its head and stared back at Eli, as if to say,
You make no sense, giant man baby blank, so shut up or I'll bite you.
Eli closed the curtains, then helped Con straighten the room and put away the pentapods.
"What are the other rules?" Eli asked. "You said the para-electrical elements won't allow their disturbances to be recorded. I get that, but what else is in the ghost code?"
It doesn't matter, because the ones we deal with are the ones who break all the other rules.
Sure, but hypothetically, what are the other rules?
They're supposed to keep their hands in their pockets, so to speak, and look but not touch.
Like children shopping with their parents in a fancy store.
Con knelt down to zip up the bag of equipment.
Exactly. The same rules that apply to time travelers. Observe without interfering.
Eli rubbed his sore shoulder.
What else?
Con looked up, his dark green eyes weary.
I don't know. I wish I had the answers. I'm not even sure if there are any rules. I make so much stuff up I forget what's real sometimes.
Seeing Con run out of answers gave Eli an unsettled feeling in his stomach. He saw a crumpled area rug out of the corner of his eye, and for an instant it was Eli's adoptive father, the first time he fell down while Eli was out. The unsettled feeling rose up, blasting static through Eli's brain and making him feel like he was coming apart at the atomic level. Everything was chaos, without meaning. He clenched his fists, a growing rage doubling with every ragged breath.
"Burgers,"
Con said. Eli's consciousness came back to the present, to the messy living room of their client.
"Burgers?"
Eli repeated. As soon as he had said the word, his mouth began to water. Hunger took hold in his stomach, and it was a relief because that very human desire was the opposite of the black emptiness that scared him.
"And fries and shakes."
Con slung the bags over his shoulders and nodded for them to leave out the back door. They were free to go because the job had been prepaid. Good or bad, they had a reputation in the neighborhood. Eli followed out the back door and to the van. The colors around him were too bright, the sky too blue, and the grass was too green. It was all too much. Con said,
"If you're tired, I can drive."
Eli handed over the keys, and they drove away. The sun was low in the sky, an hour from setting. Eli watched houses go by, murky like old memories through the temporary plastic on his window.
"There's..."
Eli's voice cracked and caught, like it was rusty from not being used for 100 years.
"There's something going on in that neighborhood," he said. "I might be new to this, but something tells me 7 poltergeists in 1 week is a sign."
"A sign we're going to be rich."
Con grinned, his teeth bright and gleaming in the glare of the setting sun.
"What do you know about..."
He paused, hesitant to mention something he thought he heard from Joey's Chihuahua.
"What do you know about the dark grid?"
The speeding van jerked off course momentarily before Con relaxed his grip on the wheel. Con bounced the question back at him.
"What do you know about the dark grid?"
"Nothing, except the dogs mentioned it.
The poodle at the first house on Wednesday said they weren't part of the plan. Then Nigel said the poltergeists were slipping through.
Wait, are we still pretending the dogs are talking to you?
Nigel didn't say it out loud, of course, but he looked at me and I heard something in my head. Just keep catching the poltergeists that slip out of the dark grid and mind your own business.
Ha! You're messing with me. You went back to the comic shop and bought those same books I did. You read that story where the treasure hunters fell into something they called a dark grid. Very funny, Eli. You big geek.
Well, I am a big geek, but I haven't been to the comic shop since Wednesday. We could go now, though. They're still open.
Nice try.
Con, I'm not messing with you. The dog really did beam something into my head.
We need to get you a special hat with a foil lining to keep those thoughts out. Now stop being weird or I'll douse you in barbecue sauce. Drop you down in the middle of the zone and let the crashers feast on your delicious body.
Eli shuddered at the thought of being dumped in the zone, with or without barbecue sauce on his delicious body. He didn't know what would be worse, becoming one of the people they ripped apart and ate, or surviving long enough to level up to stage 1 crasher.
Talking dogs, Con muttered, like we don't have enough to deal with in this city.
Eli looked out the window at the passing scenery. Have you ever thought about moving away?
Every city's got its downsides. Sometimes I think we're better off with the devil we know versus the unknown. Those perfect, pretty cities freak me out. I think they're tempting fate with their postcard perfect city parks. Me, I like a grungy city. It's got more character.
So you're not trying to save up money to get out of here and start fresh?
Con chuckled. If I move away, who's going to support Brandy with 2 E's and keep her from falling in with a bad crowd? The girl just loves to dance, my man. She wouldn't be happy as a dental hygienist.
She sounds like a carrier of disease. Con did a double take.
What did you just say?
I said the wrong thing. Eli clapped his hand to his forehead in shame. We were at the point in the conversation where I'm supposed to say she sounds like a nice girl, but she doesn't sound nice at all, especially the things you say she does with ping-pong balls.
Eli shook his head.
Brandy with 2 E's is not dental hygienist material.
Con grinned. I'm glad you have such highbrow tastes. More brandy for me. All yours. That's right.
Con turned up the volume on the van stereo and sang along with a classic rock song, Roy Orbison's Pretty Woman. Eli joined in on the chorus, and they sang the end in harmony. When the next song started, they tried to sing along, but neither knew the words, and the moment was gone. Eli lifted a bandage and checked on his forearm piranha bite. The scab pulled off with the bandage, revealing pink, unbroken skin. The bruise color was gone. That healed fast, he thought, but he didn't think too much of it because he'd always been a fast healer. Con turned the stereo down and said,
Honestly, I don't know what's happening in that neighborhood, but we're going to make some serious money.
It does seem lucrative.
Serious money.
If you say so, boss. Eli didn't always notice details, but he did notice something now. Con's grin didn't extend to his eyes. His enthusiasm was a lie. Something was going on in that neighborhood, something big and bad. The ghost hackers could keep going on calls and keep getting paid, but the problem was only going to get bigger and badder. So far that week, the poltergeists hadn't harmed anyone but Eli, but it was only a matter of time before someone got hurt. Eli wouldn't be able to live with himself if the person getting hurt was Joey. On Sunday, when he saw the kid, he would ask more questions. The 4 of them would eat medieval food and play games, but that was just a cover. Eli's real mission was to find out what Joey knew about the big, bad thing happening on his street. Chapter 10. On Saturday, Eli and Brenda went shopping as planned. They bought a new frying pan, a spice rack, 2 cold-smoked ribeye steaks, and 12 pairs of underwear that looked like they might ride up Eli's crack. On Sunday morning, Eli put on his new underwear, and he was pleased to find that not only did the navy blue briefs not ride up unpleasantly, they also transformed him into a new man. They looked like the sort of underwear a comic book hero would wear under his tights. In the privacy of the apartment's bathroom, with the door shut, Eli admired himself in the mirror. Maybe it was the influence of all the flattering things Brenda had been saying lately, but Eli Carter was one good-looking man of approximately 30. His medium brown hair had a golden sheen, and his jaw had a heroic squareness to it. 3 days of moving furniture and skipping lunch had converted a couple of Eli Carter's fat pounds into muscle pounds. But he couldn't have known that. Unlike Brenda, he didn't watch his weight or measurements closely. He dropped to the bathroom floor, did 10 push-ups, then jumped up and quickly flexed for his reflection. The new underwear certainly accented what appeared to be the beginning of a 6-pack of visible abdominal muscles. Eli examined his abs for a while, then pulled open the drawer that held a jumble of Brenda's makeup. He pulled out a container of brown eyeshadow, thought about it for a minute, then shrugged, and began applying the brown powder along his vestigial 6-pack creases. After a few minutes, Brenda tapped on the door and reminded him to turn on the fan since he was obviously committing bathroom crimes. He was not, but the truth was much worse, so he guiltily turned on the fan anyway. Eli invited Brenda to come along to the Ren Fair, but she said it would be overstimulating to meet all those new people and also attend a crowded festival. She stood by the front door watching him lace up his weekend shoes. Compared to the olive-green clothes he'd been wearing throughout the week, he felt like a comic book panel in his bright blue jeans, black and white sneakers, and red t-shirt. "You're sweet to take that kid with you," she said. Eli finished tying his shoe and looked up at Brenda. Her eyes were glossy, like she was about to cry. His mind reeled, replaying the last few minutes. Even after a quick replay, he had no idea what she was upset about. "Good times," he said. "Do you love me?" she asked. He broke out in a cold sweat. "Of course I do. What's wrong?" "Do you wish you had a kid of your own? Is that why you're taking this Joey out?" "No, I'm taking him out because he tricked me. I'm not planning to adopt him." She smiled and blinked away the sheen in her eyes. "Okay, I was just being silly. I didn't sleep much last night because I was worried about Monty. He didn't come home." Eli got up from his kneeling position and pulled Brenda into a hug. "The cat wraith? He's a big boy, and I don't know if we should be referring to our apartment as his home." She pulled away and smiled up at him teasingly. "You're just jealous because Monty likes me better." "Why does he like you better?" She shrugged. "Have fun at your geek circus." "You know I will." He kissed her goodbye and hurried off. He was running late, as usual, because his 1-minute shower had run a little longer than anticipated. Eli met the Hart siblings at Ghost Hackers, where they showed him the bench seat they'd salvaged for the van. Back when Eli had originally purchased the van, he'd gotten it from the delivery driver whose route he was taking over. It didn't come with a bench seat because that decreased the room available for packages. While the two Harts installed the seat, Eli stood off to the side, feeling useless. The two of them easily shared tools back and forth, coordinating their actions without words. Eli remembered what Khan had said about his sister talking to him while she was still in the womb, and he wondered if it was true. He would have tried to casually bring up the topic, but Valentine was bending over, and it took most of Eli's cognitive powers to not stare at her curvy butt. Eli drove them to Joey's house. Khan put on his sunglasses and snoozed in the side passenger seat. Valentine sat on the newly installed bench seat and tapped away on a laptop. She had 2 tablets and a phone on the bench next to her, and appeared to be using all 4 gadgets simultaneously. When he was reasonably sure Con was sleeping, Eli asked Valentine what she knew about the dark grid. She answered without looking up from her screens. "It's more of a membrane, so I never liked that name." So, the dark grid was real. A chill went up Eli's spine, followed by the hug-like warmth of satisfaction from being right about a hunch. "What does it do?" Eli asked. "You must know what a membrane is. It's something semi-permeable that keeps apart all the things that shouldn't be together." "Like ghosts and people?" She made a scoffing sound. "Would you take all the hydrogen atoms out of water?" Eli thought over what Valentine had said. He was no science genius, but he knew the formula for water was H2O, with hydrogen atoms and oxygen atoms forming water molecules. "Valentine, are you saying people are partly made of ghosts?" "It's not really a new theory." She tapped away at both her keyboard and phone, multitasking. "For further reference, see Every Major Religion." The typing speed increased. He thought he heard her snicker. Eli frowned at the street ahead of him. Valentine had tricked him into saying something stupid. If she'd used the word spirit or soul, he would never have asked if people were partly made of ghosts. It wasn't very nice of her to use her genius against him like that. He kept driving, in silence, his irritation stewing. Ever since Friday, he'd been looking forward to this outing with the Hart siblings. Now he wasn't sure, except for the installation of the bench seat, which was a great addition to the van. The day was turning out all wrong. They arrived in Joey's neighborhood and slowly drove up to the drab brown house, number 2860. Eli frowned at the house. It actually wasn't exactly brown. There was some purple to the hue on the siding and some green. It was the color of a bruise. The lawn had grown even longer in the last few days, thanks to overnight spring showers. The brightly hued houses on either side, with impeccable lawns and gardens, seemed to be staring straight ahead in annoyance, disgusted by their sloppy, slow-witted friend. As Eli parked and jumped out of the van, then walked up to Joey's door with Con and Valentine on either side of him, he compared himself to the bruise-colored house. He was the drab one, between the amazing Hart siblings. Valentine rang the doorbell and smiled warmly in anticipation of the door opening. Nobody came. She rang the doorbell again and again. Eventually, a woman opened the door, presumably Joey's mother. She had the same big, sad eyes as the kid. Her hair looked oily and was matted in clumps. Valentine introduced the 3 of them and shook the woman's hand. Joey's mother had the same dead-eyed, vacant stare as a crasher. When she dim-wittedly turned and offered her hand to Eli, he fought his revulsion and shook it politely. "My name is Eli," he said. "Elliot," the woman said. "Elephant. You're the elephant. Eloise. Elizabeth. LMNOP." Joey appeared and pushed her back behind him. "Mom!" She stumbled backward into the house. From what Eli could see from the doorway, the home's interior was very different from the other houses on the street, but not in layout. The front hall and living room were full of cardboard boxes, discarded clothes, and dirty dishes. He'd seen hoarding before, but the shocking thing about this home, besides it being real and not on his TV or computer screen, was the massive network of cables and wires crisscrossing the upper third of the room. Joey's mother must have had to duck to get to the front door. The house made Eli feel alert. It smelled bad, but that was expected. There was something else, something he couldn't see or smell or hear, but could feel in his bone marrow. The feeling was not painful, nor was it unpleasant. If he had to describe this feeling in comparison to something common and everyday, He'd say it was the feeling he got in the instant after logging into his computer accounts, before his new messages came up on the screen, appearing in bold text to show they were still unread, still full of possibility. It was enthrallment. Eli's feet stayed in their laced-up black and white weekend shoes, planted on the front step, but his body leaned forward. He leaned toward the home's open doorway like a seedling snaking toward a sunny window. The acrid smell of an unwashed person in movement pushed him back again. Joey's mother crouched down in front of her son and patted his hair. "You have fun, James." "I'm Joey, Mom." "Joey, Mom," she repeated, her voice robotic. Eli glanced to check the reactions of the Hart siblings. They both seemed as horrified as he felt. There was something very wrong in this house, and it was wrong inside Joey's mother's head. Con leaned into the house, and this small motion seemed to trip an invisible security alarm. A dog began barking inside the house, the yips muffled by a closed door. All around the neighborhood, other dogs joined in the chorus of angry barking. "Let's go," Joey said. He pushed his mother back 2 steps so he could close the door, then ran down the front steps toward the van. He had a child-sized backpack slung over one shoulder, a backpack Eli hoped was full of snacks and toys for the day, and not his favorite things to run away from home with. Eli had meant what he said to Brenda about not adopting this kid, but his resolve was weakening by the minute. The 3 of them followed Joey and got into the van, where Valentine helped him with his seatbelt on the bench seat next to her. He grabbed her tablet and started asking questions about it, beginning with what games she played. Eli started the van's engine, but didn't drive away immediately. He took another good look up and down the street. It was noon on a Sunday, and people were mowing lawns, weeding front gardens, and walking their tiny dogs. Eli had never lived in the suburbs, but he knew this was typical weekend behavior. The local residents all stared at the van in suspicion, but that wasn't surprising, considering their recent involvement with the local poltergeists. Movement in an upstairs window of Joey's house caught Eli's attention. The Chihuahua, Nigel, was visible in the window, perched precariously on the back of a chair so he could see out. By the look of his bugged-out eyes and the spit flying from his snarling mouth, he was not happy about Joey leaving with them. Eli felt sorry for the dog, but not sorry enough to suggest bringing the little yapper with them. Chapter 11. The Ren Fair was being held in a city park, where it wasn't unusual to see people doing fire-breathing tricks on non-Ren Fair weekends. The usual assortment of dreadlocked musicians were around, looking accusingly at the short-haired suburban families who'd invaded for the day. Few people looked twice at the 4 of them, except for some mothers who noticed Joey's grime level. Valentine leaned over and said quietly to Eli, "We need to hose down this kid. You get him into that water park over there, and I'll go buy him some clean, dry clothes." Eli agreed to the plan and loudly suggested the guys head over to the park's interactive water feature. Con rubbed his stomach. "I'll go do some recon on those food smells. You boys have fun splashing around." Con headed off toward the food trucks while Eli led Joey over to the water park, where toddlers ran squealing through the sprinklers and teenagers huddled nearby, pretending they didn't want to do the same. Joey was reluctant to take off his shoes and shirt to play with the other kids until Eli took off everything but his jeans and jumped into the fray. Within minutes, he had not just Joey soaked, but half the kids in attendance. A dozen of the less angsty teenagers even jumped into the fun. Parents stood just outside the splash zone and watched as Eli play-fought over the free spray hose, then gave the smaller kids shoulder rides. He had just swung a dripping wet and squealing Joey around in a circle and set him down when he noticed a number of mothers were watching him, Eli, and not their kids. He looked down to see what had the women's attention and noticed his well-defined abdominal muscles. They were extra defined today, thanks to the subtle brown shading of Brenda's makeup. A giggling girl asked him for a shoulder ride. He suddenly realized the teens that had joined him in the water were all females, with soaking wet tops. With an embarrassed gasp, he ran for his folded clothes at the perimeter and quickly donned his red T-shirt. He meant to scrub off the brown makeup before leaving the apartment, but Brenda had demanded access to the washroom and rushed him out. On a typical day, Eli didn't remove his shirt in public, so he hadn't anticipated any problems. Valentine stood at the splash perimeter with dry clothes for Joey in her hands. "Nice abs," she said to Eli. He thanked her and tugged on his shoes and socks without meeting her eyes. Did she really mean he had nice abs? Or was she letting him know that she knew they were mostly drawn on? She couldn't know, he told himself. Who would even notice that the shadows on someone's abs didn't obey the laws of physics and shift with the ab owner's relative angle to the sun? A genius. A genius would notice such a thing. Eli laced up his shoes and tried to remain calm. His wet jeans clung to him accusingly. He could feel heat in his cheeks from blushing. Stay calm, he told himself. According to Khan, people could spontaneously combust from embarrassment. Just because it hadn't happened to Eli before didn't mean spontaneous combustion wasn't a danger, every moment of every day. "What about me?" Joey asked brightly. Shirtless and soaking wet, he flexed his small biceps and posed like a miniature bodybuilder. "You have great abs too, Joey. One day, I'll be big like Eli, and I'll come to work with you guys." "We'll see about that. Look what I bought you. It's a red T-shirt so you can match with Eli." She held out the clothes. "Well, it's actually tie-dyed, so it's red and blue and yellow, but that's even better, right?" Joey was so excited. His words came out in an excited jumble of sounds, making him sound like a little dog barking. Valentine laughed, and it was a new type of laugh Eli hadn't heard before. It wasn't the mean laugh she shared with Khan over one of their pranks, but a genuinely joyful laugh, innocent and free. It was the kind of laugh that echoed around in your head for a while, making you smile. A knight in armor walked by just then, and Eli's smile grew bigger. As he stared at the metal components, his mind flitted to a fantasy of owning a workshop and making his own armor. His embarrassment over the fake six-pack muscles disappeared, the memory not to resurface again for several hours. As they walked around in the warm sunshine, Eli's wet jeans dried unevenly, with the section over his thighs turning soft and pliant almost immediately, while the waistband and crotch squeaked for hours. They watched the jousting performances, cheering on the participants as they raced at each other with pointed weaponry. The people jousting were not on horseback, so the damage inflicted was minimal, but Eli still winced whenever someone went down hard. There was only one horse at the event, a mellow, piebald Appaloosa with one blue eye. The horse was being ridden around by a woman in a loose-fitting tunic, who stopped to admire Joey in his tie-dye shirt and colorful cotton pants. She slid off the horse's back and offered the boy a ride. Joey looked to Eli for permission and encouragement. "Go for it," Eli said, and helped the young woman boost Joey onto the horse's back. The woman led the horse away, and Eli panicked for an instant, thinking this was an elaborate kidnapping plot. But then they didn't go far. He felt silly for being such a worrywart, but proud that he was learning new things about life. Raising a kid was stressful, but you got to see your favorite things through new eyes, so it balanced out. Eli grinned, waved, and snapped photos of Joey on the horse. He always did love horses, and seeing Joey take his first ever horse ride filled Eli's heart with an enormous squishy feeling. Next to the horse ride, Joey's favorite part of the Ren Fair was the armor and weaponry. "I want to buy something," Joey said. "Sure," Eli said. "I'll buy you something small. Do you want one of these pouches?" He leaned over a table of leather wallets and bags, all embossed with intricate Celtic designs. The scent of the tanned leather was masculine, like aftershave, and intoxicating. I have my own money, Joey said. See?
He held a fistful of bills over the leather goods. It was more than the typical kid's allowance of a few bucks. In fact, Eli quickly assessed that Joey could buy the next round of deep-fried faire food, given that he had several $1,000s in bills. Eli covered Joey's small hand with his own and looked around.
"Don't let people see you with that," he said in a hushed tone. "And what's an 8-year-old doing with that much money? Did you rob a bank or something?" "My mom's job pays really good, so she raised my allowance. She keeps giving me money and telling me to go do stuff by myself so she can work her overtime. But there aren't very many stores by our house, and I'm too small to drive the car. I tried, but my feet can't reach the pedals."
Eli knelt in front of Joey so he could look him in the eyes.
"Promise you won't try to drive the car again?" Eli said. "That's dangerous. I don't want you to get hurt." "But I get bored." "I used to get bored too when I was your age." "What did you do?" "I stayed bored. And then I grew up and got a boring job. That's life."
Joey frowned. "I don't want to get bigger."
"It's not all bad. I just got my bedtime extended by half an hour, and I had that boring job for a while, but now I have a good job working with Con and Valentine. I want to work with you. I could be your helper."
Eli smiled. In all the fun of the day, he'd nearly forgotten his plan to do detective work, but he remembered now. This could be a chance to find out what information Joey had.
"How could you help us?" Eli asked. "What do you know about the poltergeists? What special skills do you have?"
Joey shrugged and stuck his baby finger in his nostril.
"Do you see ghosts?" Eli asked. "Or talk to them?"
The kid gave him a blank look and lodged his baby finger deeper into a crusty nostril.
"Great," Eli said glumly. "Your only special skill is digging for gold in the nostril mines."
Joey laughed, just like a normal kid who'd been taken out for a day of fun.
So much for figuring out the neighborhood's mystery easily, Eli thought.
Joey patted the pants pocket where he stuffed the money.
"I'll buy something for us to play with," he said. "Something good." "Okay, but let me do the purchasing for you. Don't show anyone that money."
He glanced around to see who might overhear them. The coast was clear.
"Especially don't show Con that money."
Joey's eyes widened.
"He likes money even more than my mom does."
"He sure does." Eli got to his feet and turned back to the table of leather goods.
"Do you think my girlfriend would like one of these purses?"
Joey laughed even harder than he had at the nostril mining joke.
"You don't have a girlfriend?"
"Yes, I do."
"No, you don't."
"Do too."
"Do not."
Eli spent the next half hour browsing the leather goods and trying to convince Joey he did have a girlfriend. He bought Brenda a coin purse with a Celtic cat design stamped into the black leather. She wouldn't use the coin purse, but he bought it mainly for the yellowed brochure it came with, which had a creepy illustration of a black cat with a patch of white on its chest, along with the legend of the cat Sith. The ornate typeface used for the text was almost illegible, but Eli thought Brenda would find it sweet he'd been thinking of her. He was being sweet. He imagined Brenda mentioning his blossoming sensitivity, and nearly canceled the transaction in irritation, but his password had already gone through on the handheld card swiper. Joey wasn't interested in buying anything leather, so they left and met up with Con and Valentine at a booth for handmade chainmail. 2 people were twisting wire in a live demonstration, and their handiwork was displayed on mannequins as well as live models. Con couldn't take his eyes off an attractive blonde model wandering through the crowd, displaying a chainmail bikini. Even Joey's eyes bugged out at the sight of her, making him resemble Nigel, his chihuahua.
"Chainmail is awesome,"
Con said for the 10th time.
"She's for display only," Valentine said to her brother. "Wipe that drool off your chin."
"You have to admire the craftsmanship,"
Con said.
Very impressive, Eli said in agreement.
No, you have to admire it, up close. Excuse me for a minute.
Con cleared his throat, rolled back his shoulders, and walked toward the blonde in the chainmail bikini. Now that's craftsmanship, Valentine said breathily. Not the girl. Look over there. Eli followed her unwavering gaze to a shirtless, muscular man posing for photos with a sword in one hand and a shield in the other. The shadows of his abdominal muscles seemed accurate enough. Nice shield, Eli said. Valentine sighed. What shield? Joey tugged on Eli's hand. Can I go over there for a minute? Sure, little man. Are you hungry again? You know you don't have to eat sugar and deep-fried things, then throw up in a trash can. But I can't say it's not part of the magic of a Ren Fair to cram food down your hole until your tummy says reboot. Valentine let out her joyful laugh again. Your tummy says reboot? When it gets too boogity, yeah. Boogity? Valentine laughed again, and Eli didn't notice Joey slipping away from them. Someone tapped on Eli's shoulder. He turned around, expecting to see Con there with a big grin and a bikini model, but the man standing behind him wasn't Con. The rest of the world blurred around Eli, allowing him to focus only on the person before him. He hadn't seen him since high school, and the last he heard, the bully was serving time in jail. But that must have been untrue. Unless he had a twin, the man standing in front of Eli Carter was the criminally cruel Falcon Devereaux. He was eating cotton candy. Chapter 12.
Eli Carter. I thought it was you, Falcon said.
In the shock of the moment, Eli could scarcely breathe, let alone speak. He fought an internal battle, feeling more awful by the second. After a week of paranormal battles and feeling like a hero, he was back to his cowardly ways. Falcon, the guy who made life hell in high school, stood before him now, and Eli could do nothing. They hadn't seen each other for over a decade, but all that time compressed as Eli stared into Falcon's deep, dark eyes. He'd gained some weight and filled out, so his cheeks were no longer gaunt, but he still had that look, hunger, malice. Eli winced, his eyes stinging as he remembered the shame. Falcon convinced him to go into the zone that night where they'd shattered the spirit of another boy, Mike. Eli let down his father that night, and even though he'd allowed some forgiveness to throw light into that dark memory, there was still shame, still pain.
How long has it been, anyway?
Falcon grinned, like a regular person who wasn't a sociopath might grin upon running into an old friend.
About 10 years,
Eli croaked.
You haven't changed a bit,
Falcon said jovially. Eli tore his gaze from the man's darkly hypnotic eyes and looked him over. His black, glossy hair was long on top and slicked back, the way he'd always worn it. His hairline had receded about half an inch at the temples, but still arched down into a widow's peak. Falcon could have played Dracula every year for Halloween if he was the sort of kid who put on costumes rather than the sort of kid who set things on fire.
You look older,
Eli said, because it was true.
You look 15 years older, even though it's only been 10.
One of Falcon's eyes twitched, but he didn't drop the mask of his grin. He turned to the person standing next to him, a naive-looking young woman of about 20 with bad acne, and said,
That's Eli, always telling you about what you don't want to hear.
I'm Dawn, the woman said, raising her hand in an odd gesture, like a princess from another planet. Valentine, who'd been standing quietly beside Eli, introduced herself. I'm Eli's friend. She didn't say her name, just shook Dawn's hand with a loose grasp. Dawn had wide-set blue eyes, hair that was between brown and blonde, and full lips. She might have been attractive, if not for the weeping red sores on her face, or her proximity to Falcon Devereaux. As Eli looked downward, His unease grew. Beneath Dawn's too small shirt was a pale, distended belly. She was growing Falcon's child. Eli clamped his jaw to keep from expressing his disgust. Falcon looped his arm lazily around Dawn's shoulders, as though showcasing her. "Hey, Eli, what was that funny nickname the gang had for you?" He snapped his fingers, like that would summon the memory. "It wasn't the whole gang," Eli said. "Just you. And it wasn't funny." Falcon let out a laugh, trying to sound charming. Eli glanced over to Valentine to catch her reaction. Her expression was almost neutral, but there was enough tension in her brow to show she was not being charmed. Falcon kept snapping his fingers, then stopped and exclaimed, "Pumpkin! We used to call you Pumpkin." Eli tensed. "My name is Eli Carter." The pregnant girl gasped, then turned to whisper something into Falcon's ear. "Yes, of course it's him," Falcon said, sounding annoyed. She whispered in his ear again. "I don't care about that," Falcon growled. "I'll talk to whoever I want. We're just talking. I went to school with him. A guy's allowed to talk to his old friends." "We weren't friends," Eli said. Falcon tipped his head to the side. "Aw, don't do me like that, Pumpkin." Eli clenched his fist. It would be so satisfying to hear the snap of something breaking under his fist. He was not a violent guy, but if Falcon called him Pumpkin one more time, something bad was going to happen. The girl kept whispering into Falcon's ear, getting more animated and upset. The only word Eli could make out was rules, and she kept saying it. Falcon's attention was partly distracted by his companion, and Eli's fist felt so powerful. He considered letting go, swinging away, but dampened the urge by reminding himself there were small children around, including Joey. At the thought of Joey, he realized the small boy was not at his side. He turned to Valentine, all but dismissing Falcon. "Where's Joey? Is he with Con?" Valentine, who'd been watching Falcon with narrowed eyes, jerked her gaze off him and started searching the crowd. "I see him, over there," she said. "Good thing I dressed that kid in tie-dye." "You have a kid?" Falcon asked. "How old?" Valentine started walking in the direction she'd seen Joey. Now he was alone with Falcon. There were no Hart siblings around to hear him, or to be impressed by Eli standing up for himself, but he wanted this moment anyway. He looked right into Falcon's deep, dark eyes and told him exactly what he thought of him. The girl stared at Eli in wide-eyed astonishment. The truth couldn't be a surprise to her, but if it was, then so be it. Eli finished by saying, "Go to hell!" and then he walked away. He could feel their eyes on him, so he moved quickly to lose himself in the crowd. His pulse was racing, but he felt good, alert, alive, like how he felt in a room with a ghost. He caught up to Joey and Valentine, who was lecturing the kid about not running off in a crowd without a grown-up at his side. Joey said, "Sorry. Want to see what I bought?" He held a brown sack made of burlap, and whatever was inside the bag was almost as big as Joey. Eli was dying to see what was inside the bag, but he didn't want to run into Falcon Devereaux again. "I want to leave now," Eli said. "Let's find Con and leave the fair, and save Joey's reveal for the drive home. Is that okay with you, little man?" Joey's lower lip trembled. "But I don't want to go home. Can't I hang out with you? It's not even dark yet." It wasn't dark yet, but the sun was low on the horizon, and the scent of illegal smoked substances wafted over the crowd. All the vendors were packing up, but a live band was just starting up on the bandstand. Eli looked over to Valentine for guidance. "We should go," she said to Eli. "That friend of yours gave me the creeps. Plus, I've got stuff to do." Joey crossed his arms and stomped his foot. "I don't want to go yet." She frowned at the pouting child, then turned to Eli. "Is he being ironic, or is he actually throwing a tantrum?" She seemed genuinely confused, like someone who spent all her free time with computers and not children. I won't go, Joey yelled. Eli watched the kid carefully. If he had some sort of magic powers or a tiny ray gun in his pocket, now could be the time he used it. Joey threw his burlap bag to the ground and continued to make throwing motions, even though his hands were empty. He wailed about never getting to do anything fun, despite the obvious irony of wailing about it while at the Ren Fair. The crowd in the park didn't pay much attention to him, nor to the other kids within earshot who were doing the exact same thing. Con stepped out of the crowd, returning from his adventures, and rested his elbow on Eli's shoulder to better watch Joey's tantrum. After a minute, he turned to Eli and asked,
"What are we doing here? This is cruel and unusual, and why aren't we recording it?"
"I had a hunch." Eli looked around, aware that Joey's tantrum was getting loud enough to attract a few curious onlookers. "I thought maybe the kid had powers, like voodoo or something. He would demonstrate them now if he did, right? I think he has something to do with the POLT you-know-whats."
"Voodoo?"
Con raised his dark eyebrows in amusement. "Yes, it does sound stupid now that I hear it out loud."
"Voodoo is far from stupid, but this kid doesn't have any,"
Valentine interjected. "There's clearly something wrong with the mother."
Con shook his head. "She's a hoarder, mentally ill, very sad, nothing paranormal."
He swung his fist emphatically like a gavel pounding an invisible podium.
"Definitely not anything that should concern 3 hard-working people trying to secure a steady revenue stream in this economy. Those 3 people should be thankful and not ask too many questions."
Joey had thrown himself on the grass and was kicking and flailing his arms like a child half his age. If he was anything like a juvenile poltergeist, he would wear himself out soon, or so Eli thought. "Con." Valentine's pale green eyes looked troubled as she stared at her big brother. "He needs his mother. He's just a kid."
"We were all kids once," Con growled. "Get him up and let's go. Fun's over."
Eli snapped into action at Con's order. He knelt down at Joey's feet and caught him by the ankles. "Valentine, you hook him under the armpits. That's the heavy part. I wouldn't want you to get kicked."
"I have a better idea," Con said.
He picked up Joey's burlap sack and shook out its heavy contents. The objects were wrapped in more burlap material, but the shapes were clearly those of a sword and shield. Con shook out the empty burlap sack. Next, he moved swiftly. In a flash, he'd stuffed the still wailing and kicking Joey inside the burlap sack. He threw the sack over his shoulder like a young, fit Santa Claus. Con Hart gave Eli a look, as if to say,
"You're absolutely right. This isn't the first time I've stuffed a screaming kid into a burlap sack, and it won't be the last."
Eli and Valentine grabbed the wrapped objects from the ground, then chased after Con and the squirming sack.
"Out of my way!"
Con yelled as he pushed through the crowd.
"Animal control officer coming through. I got a bag of rabid badgers. Step aside."
Chapter 13. Joey was calm and quiet inside the burlap sack by the time they reached the van, where Con let him out. He climbed into the back seat, buckled his seatbelt, and sat quietly, staring straight ahead, his hands folded on his lap.
"You just have to show them who's boss," Con said, gruffly.
"I'd rather earn someone's trust through respect," Eli said. "If you want a friend, you have to be a friend." For this, Eli was rewarded with a pat on the shoulders from Valentine. "You're sweet," she said. He grinned. "But stupid," she added. He clenched his jaw to keep from agreeing with her. Then they got into the van to begin the drive back to Joey's suburban neighborhood. During the drive, Valentine worked on getting Joey to open up. She told him she'd been tossed into a sack dozens of times by Con, and that it wasn't so bad, because they always played Tea Party afterward. Eli snickered at the vivid description Valentine gave of Con playing Tea Party. Bit by bit, Joey talked a little more about his life. He was an only child, and his mother was raising him by herself. He had aunts and uncles, but in another city. The two of them moved into the neighborhood a month ago for his mother's new job. Neither of them wanted to leave the rest of the family, but she promised him it wouldn't be forever. "New job?" Valentine asked. "Does she work at a hospital or somewhere there are sick people?" "No, she works on the computer. She doesn't have to drive anywhere." "She works at home?" "Yep." He fidgeted with the wrapped sword and shield on his lap. "Don't even ask me what she does on there, because I don't know. It's all codes and numbers." Eli looked around at the houses they were driving by. Something about the story wasn't adding up. He kept his eyes on the road, but turned his head to the side and said, "Joey, if your mother works from the house, she could work anywhere. Why did you have to move away from your other family?"
"Don't be rude," Con said to Eli. "He's just a sweet, innocent kid. You don't have to cross-examine him, Mr. Prosecutor. We're just three hard-working grunts who should mind their own business and keep having jobs."
Ignoring Con, Eli asked Joey, "Is your mother sick? I was a bit older than you when my dad got sick. It was really scary, and the worst part was I didn't have anyone to talk to, because my dad was my best friend." "She's not sick," Joey said. "Nigel would tell me if she was." "Nigel?" Valentine asked. "Is that your little dog you were telling me about? The Chihuahua?" "Yep. Nigel says she's just busy with her job, but it won't be long now, and then when the job is done, they'll let her go. Nigel says she'll be at peace, and I can go with her." Joey finished talking, and a hush fell over the interior of the van. Eli glanced over at Con, who turned toward the window, avoiding eye contact. Eli adjusted the rearview mirror so he could look at Valentine. Her eyes were wide and glistening. "Do you know what that means?" she asked Joey. "What it means to be at peace?" "It means happy, right?" Valentine met Eli's gaze in the mirror. "Yes," she said to Joey in a soothing voice. "At peace means happy." The sun had set during the drive. Eli parked the van in front of Joey's house and stepped out into the darkness. The street lamps overhead glowed weakly, shedding little light. "You can't park in front," Joey said.
"We're just dropping off,"
Con said gruffly. Joey unsnapped his seatbelt and shuffled out. His wrapped packages held awkwardly against his chest. "Are those heavy?" Eli reached for the items. "Mine!" Joey yelled. Eli dropped his arms and stood back, watching as Joey dropped clumsily out of the vehicle. "See you around," Eli said. Joey grumbled something, then walked slowly toward his house, the heavy objects making his steps ring out. He walked with his head and shoulders knotted down in the saddest of postures, which made the squishy feeling in Eli's chest feel like a sharp blade. Eli stood on the sidewalk, considering his options. It was hard to think with the ruckus of every dog in the neighborhood barking at once. Con, who was still inside the vehicle, called out,
"Don't you dare go inside that house. We should mind our own business, a business that could pay quite well."
Eli stared at Joey's sad, shuffling silhouette. "Should we vote? Because I vote we go in there and see what we can do for his mother." All around the neighborhood, the barking dogs were getting louder, and there was a scratching sound like claws on wood. Valentine finally spoke up. "My vote is with the sweet but stupid one," she said. "I vote we go in and assess the situation."
"Fine,"
Con grunted as he opened his door and jumped out.
"Let's follow Eli Carter to our destiny."
The three of them walked through the suburban darkness toward the bruise-colored house. Joey opened the front door, and his snarling dog came flying out like a miniature demon from hell.
"I got this,"
Con said, and he put the burlap sack to use for the second time that day, scooping the small dog easily. He pulled the drawstring tight and hung the bag on a jacket hook just inside the front door of the house. "Good one," Valentine said.
"Sit,"
he said to the squirming bag.
"Good boy."
An eerie growling came from the captured chihuahua, as if to say, "When I get out of here, I will slurp the marrow from your bones." "Nigel, shut up," Joey said to the burlap sack. "For once I'm going to have friends play at my house, and you can't stop me." The dog went quiet. Valentine led the way into the house, grimacing as she stepped over piles of detritus. "Hello," she called into the dimly lit space. "We're back with Joey. Can we talk to you for a minute?" There was no answer. They ducked to pass under a spider web of cables and wires, moving deeper into the house. "Hello?" The only sound was a hum, like a sustained note. Chapter 14. They moved deeper into the house, toward the humming sound. Once they turned a corner, they could hear someone typing on a keyboard, and followed that sound. They found Joey's mother in a room that had once been the home's dining nook, but was now filled with desks on 3 sides. The trio of desks were stacked with an array of monitors, all lit up with incomprehensible charts and strings of numbers.
"Geek heaven,"
Con said under his breath. "Or geek hell," Valentine said. Joey's mother sat on a swivel chair, seemingly unaware of the 3 strangers or even her own son. She tapped on one keyboard, the sound like rain on a tile roof, then swiveled on the chair and tapped on another. They watched as she repeated the same chain of movements 3 times, moving like a robotic arm in a factory, programmed to do a repetitive task. The room was warm and dry, smelling of hot circuit boards and body odor. The chandelier light was off, the room lit only by the light of the monitors, flickering from blue to green as she typed. Eli couldn't be sure, but the woman herself seemed to be glowing softly, her skin changing colors in sync with the monitors. "Mom?" Joey tugged on her sleeve. "My friends are here. Do you want to meet them? Can you take a break?" "Not now," she said. "Mommy has to work overtime." "5 minutes?" Joey begged. She repeated herself like a recording. "Not now. Mommy has to work overtime." He tugged her sleeve again, getting more aggressive. "But Mom!" His voice rose in frustration, the way it had before pitching his tantrum earlier that day. "Not now." She lifted one hand from the keyboard and pressed it palm down against Joey's face. A flash of light pulsed from her hand and sent Joey windmilling backward, crashing against one of the desks. "Mommy has to work overtime," she finished, her tone cool and robotic. Joey stumbled away from her, rubbing his elbow. He looked up at Eli with an expression of pain and confusion, then ran from the room. Eli followed after him. "Joey, wait! I'm sure your mother didn't mean it." He stumbled over cardboard boxes and junk in the hallway, slowing him down. He could hear Joey sobbing somewhere in the house. "Where are you?" Joey's voice came back, distant and muffled. "Go away. Leave me alone." "No," said Eli. "We want to help you." Joey didn't respond. Eli fumbled his way down the cluttered hallway until he found the little boy's bedroom. Unlike the rest of the house, this room was orderly and nearly empty. A small bed with rumpled blankets sat in one corner, and a child's homework desk sat in the other, lit by a domed lamp. "Joey, are you in here?" No answer. "I'm going to snoop around your room. Feel free to come in and stop me, or show me your treasures." He walked to the closet first and felt around in the hanging clothes, expecting to make contact with the kid. Whenever he played hide-and-seek with the kids he babysat, standing in the clothes closet was a favorite hiding place. He suspected it was because finding someone with your hands, naturally, led to a few minutes of tickling. There was nobody in the closet. Eli turned and went to the boy's desk. He reached for the top book on a stack of school textbooks and opened the book. The spine cracked with a telltale sound. It had never been opened. In the center of the desk sat Joey's deck of cards and the comic book Eli had given him. The comic was not even a week old, but already lovingly crumpled. Eli turned away from the desk and left the room, still in search of Joey and still calling his name. He could hear Valentine and Con in the other room, arguing in hushed tones about what to do next. Con was saying they had no equipment and weren't able to do anything. Valentine ordered him to search the kitchen for supplies while she got her computers from the van. Eli met her in the hallway near the front door. "Do you need some help?" "I could use some light." He reached around, found the light switch, and flicked it on. Nothing happened. The bulb was burned out, and they had no hope of finding a replacement in this disastrous house. "Power surges must have blown the lights," Valentine said. "Typical." "Typical for what? What's going on? Is it something para-electrical?" "Something's taken over her mind and is using it as a supercomputer." "Cool," Eli said. She made a tisk sound of disgust. Should we call someone?" he asked. "Who? Scientists?" "Sure," she said tersely. "You call up the scientists who fix these things. Obviously, I was overthinking this like I always do." "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be sorry. Just be useful," she snapped. She opened the door, letting in the chaotic chorus of dogs barking. The burlap sack containing Nigel hanging by the door was still and silent, like the dog was listening to everything. "What can I do?" Eli asked. "You look after the kid," she said. "Keep him distracted." "Well, I can't even find him. You can fix this, right? Is Joey's mother going to be okay?" Valentine's silence sent a dark dread through Eli. "I'll find the kid." "And I'll do what I can." She stepped out the front door and ran toward the van. Eli at the doorway, keeping watch until she returned, breathing heavily with her laptop and tablets tucked under her arm. "Thanks," she said. "I just saw a window at the garden level. This house has a cellar. You might want to check down there." She glanced up at the tangle of computer cables webbing overhead. "Follow these lines. If there's a server room, the computers will be down somewhere cool." "You're a genius," Eli said. She went off in the direction of Joey's mother, and Eli followed the cables to what looked like a hall closet door with the top half roughly chopped away. The handle was locked, but he was tall enough to reach over and twist it open from the inside. He whistled down into the darkness, then called out, "Joey!" Nothing came back, except the scent of more hot circuit boards wafting up the narrow staircase. He called again, noting that the cellar sounded very deep, like the floor was at least 12 feet away. He didn't search for a light switch, wrongly assuming every bulb in the house was burned out. "I'm coming down there," he said to the dark pit. He pulled out his phone and turned on the flashlight function, ignoring the dozens of text messages that had accumulated all day. He crept slowly down the stairs, which were wooden and creaky. Very creaky, of course. All the better to make him feel uneasy and flood his crack with crack sweat. As he stepped down into the cellar, which was at least 14 feet deep if it was an inch, his unease shifted into curiosity. His phone wasn't the only light source down here. A shaft of light from the street lamp came through a single garden-level window, but there was something else as well. A network of faintly shimmering lines crisscrossed the air around him. He was reminded of high-tech security systems, like the kind seen in modern heist movies. He felt a little resistance as he passed through each line, but it was mild enough that he couldn't rule out his imagination. The lines were purple. No, violet. They were as thin as fishing line, but only visible at the edge of Eli's vision. When he tried to look at the lines directly, they were invisible, dark. This was the dark grid. Not only was it real, but Eli was wading into it. One foot hit solid ground, and Eli stumbled. He turned back and gave a dirty look to the final step, which was shorter than the others. His skin tingled, and he held still. Something had changed. He rotated slowly, using the dim light from his phone to find the perimeters of the room. Despite being extra deep, it looked like an ordinary cellar, just big enough to hold a family's boxes of Christmas decorations, plus case slots of bulk food and whatever else they didn't want to keep in the garage. This cellar didn't hold any of those ordinary goods, though. Valentine was right about it being a server room. One wall of industrial shelving held about 3 dozen computers, all whirring their individual fans and hard drives, combining to play a minor musical chord that wanted to resolve, but hung there instead, unresolved. The dark grid still gleamed around him, in sight, but out of sight. "Joey?" He listened for a response, but there was only a scratching sound like paws on a dry surface. He shone his light down at his feet, looking for rodents, but found only round, shiny wood bugs ambling their way along the cracks in the foundation. Were his ears really that good? Had he actually heard the tiny footfalls of wood bugs? What Eli didn't notice was the absence of something, the absence of the neighborhood's dogs barking outside. He glanced around the dark pit again. High on the wall opposite the computer servers was a cellar window that looked onto the home's overgrown garden. He would have opened it for some fresh air, but he couldn't reach it, and it didn't seem to have a latch. He turned his fading light onto the servers and walked over to take a closer look. There were so many servers, and the sound wasn't just their fans. He could hear the grinding sound of hard drives being used. He reached tentatively toward one of the machine's power buttons. He extended his finger slowly, bracing himself for a shock. The demonstration by Joey's mother had stuck with him, and he had little doubt these computers had a self-preservation system. If he pressed the power switch, what would happen? Would the machine shock him before he could depress the button? He remembered the first blast he'd gotten for touching something Khan told him not to touch, back at their first call together. His arm locked up. He didn't want to get shocked, but he did want to push the button. Maybe shutting down the computers would stop whatever was happening to Joey's mother. Could it be that easy for him to save the day? He lunged forward and pushed the button. The computer's flashing lights didn't change their pattern, let alone go dark. He pushed the button again. Nothing happened. "Decoy buttons," he muttered. The computers kept humming and scratching away on their hard drives, their bright lights taunting him. He pushed the button in again, held it for 5 seconds, then released it. When the computer didn't power down, Eli growled in frustration and stepped over to try the computer next to it, and then the one after that. He tried button after button and completely forgot about the one thing he'd come down to the cellar to do. Eli didn't notice the cellar growing darker. Up by the window behind him, the neighborhood's dogs gathered on the other side of the glass. Their small bodies worked together, blocking out the light of the street lamp, while they discussed what action to take next. The dogs were in agreement about killing him and the other humans, including the mother and the boy, but felt they should wait. The transactions were nearly ready. They'd been nearly ready for weeks, but big programming projects like this always fell behind schedule. Now they were really, truly, absolutely, nearly ready. Once it was done, they would have their time. The power would be vast, almost limitless. All the indignities suffered these past weeks would be forgotten. All the humiliation of being small, of eating food from a can or a bag served on the floor. All of that would be in the past, and they would have everything. Everything! And killing these weak, meddling, monkey-like humans would be just the start. Chapter 15. Valentine looked up from her laptop's glowing screen. "The dogs have stopped barking," she said to Khan. "Good," he said. "Peanuts?" He offered her the jar he'd found in the kitchen. She blinked at him, like the idea of putting food in her mouth was as ridiculous as sticking her fingers into an electrical socket to recharge. Valentine Hart was entirely human, but in moments like these, when she was deep into problem-solving mode and interfacing with electronics, her humanity faded to the background. She paid so little attention to her body that lately she'd been forced to see a specialist 3 times a week to adjust her spine with physical manipulation and lecture her about joint health. She took a dozen types of supplements now and met with a trainer for an exercise regimen that was a cross between yoga and medieval torture. Con was still talking about the peanuts, but she'd returned to her work, slipping in like a highly suggestible hypnotist subject. He handed her a bottle of water, and she drank it without taking her eyes off her screens. They were both in the entryway to the dining nook, 6 feet behind Joey's mother, who was still performing her routine. The woman hadn't slowed or stopped since their arrival. If anything, she seemed to be working faster. That meant the hearts needed to work faster, too. Valentine sat on the floor, cross-legged, her laptop on her knees. The smug personal trainer made her sit like this to meditate, to clear her mind, but her mind was never more clear than it was like this, working on a puzzle he couldn't understand. Whenever she sat in his eucalyptus-scented studio, on the blue mat, she pretended she was focusing on the flickering candle, but really she was creating algorithms and making mental models of encryption layers. A flickering candle might seem to move at random to a normal person, but it was not random. The pattern could be decoded, and when all factors were accounted for, such as the chemical composition of the melting wax, the length of the wick, the size and location of open windows in the yoga studio's adjoining office, well, you could be sure there was nothing random at all about the candle's flickering movements. But it was pretty. Valentine hit return to send her new query, then waited. A response came, but it took too long and gave her a bad feeling. Her connection wasn't secure. The makeshift firewall she was using to access Joey's mother's computer network wasn't holding the energy of the dark grid back. The letter Q on her keyboard was already giving her mild electrical shocks. She grunted in frustration.
"What's wrong? I can get her out of that chair," Con offered. "She's too big for a burlap sack, but I'll think of something humane."
"Don't touch her," Valentine snapped.
"Then I'll power everything down. What do I yank first? The home's electrical system or the internet?"
"Don't touch anything, Con. Her nervous system is entwined with the network. You'll kill her."
"Then I'll distract her."
He walked over to the woman's hunched form and shook the jar of peanuts under her nose. The woman's glow turned amber in warning. "Not now." She reached for his arm, her palm crackling and glowing white with an electrical charge. Con jumped back quickly, stumbling out of her reach. "Mommy has to work overtime," she finished. "Careful," Valentine said, completely distracted from her computer work by the very real danger in front of her. Con's heart might not withstand a shock from the woman. Their mission was important, but dying over it was, hopefully, optional.
"I'm fine,"
Con said, irritation in his voice. He didn't like her fussing over him and being silly, making sure he slept enough hours and didn't get electrocuted to death on job sites. Con knelt down on the floor behind her, peering down at the computer screens.
"Not done yet?"
She jerked her arm back to strike his solar plexus with the point of her elbow. Valentine put up with a lot from her big brother, but there was one thing he did that topped the list of irritating habits, and it was saying those 3 words. Not done yet? Unfortunately for Valentine and her computer screens, she'd elbowed him right after he'd shoved a handful of peanuts into his mouth, and now the peanuts and spit sprayed over everything while he coughed. He reached for the laptop.
"Here, let me smear that around for you."
She growled and held him back with the point of her elbow. "Don't you dare! There's no time. I need to get these transactions reversed before we shut it down."
"I thought you were just turning it off. What transactions?"
Valentine groaned. Shutting it off had been the plan 10 minutes ago, but Con hadn't been paying attention, or maybe she hadn't told him. The glow on her keyboard was spreading from the Q to the nearest keys. "I don't know," she said, a note of despair seeping into her voice. "I feel funny. Maybe there's no point to this, to any of this. What's the use in saving one person? What's the use in reversing these transactions and preventing the collapse of the world's economy? Maybe we should just start humanity over, from nothing. Full reset."
Val?
Shh. I'm reversing what I did. I changed my mind. Go away. She started tapping the commands to reverse her last 10 queries. Already she was feeling better. Why fight the flow? That was something her personal trainer was always talking about. He'd said something particularly upsetting one day during meditation. While she was mentally programming ways to make the world better, he'd said something that shook her. It wasn't his usual rainbow nonsense.
What if everything is as it should be?
What if she just went with the flow for once, instead of standing like a rock in the stream? Why not speed up the inevitable crash and reset? Con shook her by the shoulders.
Val, don't talk crazy.
She pulled her hands up to her chest and looked into his dark green eyes. He was so much like their father. Sometimes it hurt to look at him. She missed him so much. She missed her faith that everything would work out. Con kept shaking her, and the senses in her body returned. Her left hip ached from sitting cross-legged. An insect at the Ren Fair had bit her on the back of the neck, and the spot itched. The air around Con's mouth reeked of peanuts. "Thanks," she said, her voice almost a whisper. "I was slipping away there for a minute. I'm not even jacked in directly. The grid is really strong here. This house must be over a fault line." She rubbed her eyes, stalling for time, afraid of touching her keyboard again. "Do you think you can find some coffee in that kitchen? I need caffeine, and I need you to interrupt me every 10 minutes like you normally do."
There's my girl.
He squeezed her shoulder, the same way their father would have. Then he went in search of coffee. She struck the keyboard with aggressive keystrokes, curling her fingers to use her fingernails to prevent contact with her skin. "Take that," she thought. 3 hours of Joey's mother's work was reversed in 2 commands. With the new macro, it would go faster now, and she had a workaround for the letter Q, remapping it to the infrequently used tilde key. By the time Con returned with a mug of hot coffee, she had a plan to fix everything. "I'm done," someone said. Con and Valentine looked up at Joey's mother, who'd stopped typing and rotated on her chair to face them. The woman's eyes were open, but lifeless. Behind her, the computer screens went dark. The woman pulsed with violet light. "I'm done," she said.
Done what?
Con asked. Valentine tapped a new query and braced herself for bad news. The results flashed onto her screen. It was worse than she expected. "Con, her program is running. Everything's already in motion. I don't know if I can stop it. Do we really care if billions of dollars, maybe trillions, are about to change hands?"
Where's the money going? Can you reroute it to my checking account?
Valentine rubbed her eyes again. It was all too much responsibility. A doomsday algorithm ran in her head. Wars starting, bombs flying, nuclear strikes. What happened next would make Crashdown look like a fire drill. It wasn't about the money or where it went, but about the finger-pointing, chaos, and paranoia. There were too many crazy paranoid leaders with red buttons. There were too many people out there with nothing to lose, hoping for a reshuffle of the deck. She ran the query again and saw a glimmer of light. "I have an idea," she said excitedly. The program had a fail-safe, but if she could reverse one thing, the final sweep wouldn't run. The money would shift, but red flags would go up in every computer connected to a financial institution, and the sweep wouldn't hide the trail. There would be a day of chaos, and programmers around the world would have the worst day of their lives, but this could be fixed. Valentine checked the time. She had less than 10 minutes before the sweep ran, and it would take her 2 minutes to code the worm. She grabbed the mug of coffee and downed it, liquid overflowing down her cheeks and onto her shirt. She didn't even notice as she wiped her chin on her shoulder. In front of them, the woman on the swivel chair groaned, like she might be about to throw up. Valentine typed faster while shuffling backward on the floor, still cross-legged. "Keep her away from me," she said to Con. "But don't touch her. Find a blanket or a stick. There's got to be something around here you can use." The woman groaned. "I can be at peace now," she said. She closed her eyes and drooped forward in the chair.
"Don't go," Con gasped. "Your son needs you.
He moved toward her, ignoring Valentine's shouts of warning. He grabbed the woman's shoulders and her glow zapped him and sent him flying back. Valentine screamed and went to Khan's side. He groaned and curled into a ball, cursing and moaning in pain. "Don't you dare leave me," Valentine said. He took a deep breath, held it, then exhaled audibly.
"People keep saying that to me," he said. "Val, don't let Eli give me mouth-to-mouth. I'm still alive. My heart's okay."
"Eli." Valentine blinked and looked around the dark room. "I forgot about Eli." Her mental timer clicked away the seconds. She had only 9.5 minutes to run the program, but now she was worried about Eli, which would slow her down. It would take twice as long to code if she was thinking about him. Where was he? She called out into the darkness. "Eli! Joey!" Her verbal query was met with a distant cry for help. Khan's sense of hearing and visual spatial modeling was better than hers, so she turned to him.
"Sounds like he's in the cellar," Khan said. "I'll get him."
He tried to stand, but his legs kept shaking. The effort was making him gasp. He was a strong man, but the electrical shock had taken a lot out of him. Valentine was already in motion. She grabbed her laptop and used the sleeve of her hoodie to shield her hand as she yanked a blue cable from one of the nearby computers. A new plan formed in her head, and it was even better than the previous one. Going down to the cellar wasn't just an option. It was the logical choice. "You stay here and rest," she ordered. "I'll run down there and see what trouble he's gotten himself into. I can plug directly into one of the servers, assuming they're down there."
"Be careful,"
he said. She snorted as she made her way down the cluttered, dim hallway. "Be careful of a server room? Please." From down in the cellar, Eli hollered again, his words incomprehensible. She found the doorway to the cellar and started down the creaky wood steps. She could see movement in the deep pit, and she heard moaning. "Eli?"
"Don't come down here,"
he yelled.
"I got this. Sorry I yelled for help before. False alarm."
"Are you tripping over stuff in the dark? Why didn't you turn on the light?"
"Everything's under control," he grunted.
She backed up by 2 steps and palmed the wall where a logical person would have put a light switch. She found the plastic toggle easily and flipped it on. Light filled the cellar. She looked up at the bare bulb, relieved that this one hadn't burned out, and she could actually see everything around her. In 2 seconds, she was about to wish otherwise. She blinked, let out a small sneeze as her eyes reacted to the light, then turned to look down into the cellar. Her eyes widened. The bare bulb revealed a twisted, terrifying monster, unlike anything Valentine Hart had ever seen. Eli stood in one corner, armed only with a snow shovel. With the light switched on, Eli appeared to be rapidly reassessing the monster, the situation, and whether or not he had everything under control. He dropped the shovel, turned to Valentine, and yelled, "Run!" Chapter 16. The creature hadn't been so terrifying at first. Eli had finally given up on turning off the servers and started looking around for a power outlet. With the way the servers had been installed, Eli couldn't just yank the power. There was enough of a tangle of cords running in and out of the cellar that finding the outlets they were plugged into wasn't easy. In fact, Eli hadn't found the outlets when he discovered an alcove tucked under the stairwell. He remembered that he was still looking for Joey, and this seemed like a good hiding place for the boy. There was a crashing of glass behind him. From where he stood, he couldn't see that the dogs had broken through the cellar's window and were tumbling in, one at a time. Eli called into the darkness, "Joey! Was that you?" He shone his phone's light around the cubby's alcove. He saw huddled shapes, but they were only 2 dusty bags of rock salt sitting next to a snow shovel. Something growled behind Eli, making his skin tighten all over his body. That wasn't a sound Joey made. Eli reached for the snow shovel, held it like a weapon, and turned around slowly. The snarling was coming from a dog, a small dog. It was the same shape and coloring as a Great Dane, but the size of a rat. No, not even the size of a rat. More like a mouse. Eli let out a laugh of relief, and then a laugh of amusement. The teeny tiny Great Dane glared back at him, as if to say,
"Puny human, prepare to meet your death."
Eli laughed harder. "You're hilarious," he said to the dog. "What are you going to do? Grab my shoelaces and untie my boots? I've committed bathroom crimes bigger than you, dog." The animal did not appreciate being compared to a dookie, and growled louder. Eli wiped a tear from his eye. He hoped his phone had enough battery life for a photo. Movement by the window caught Eli's attention and made him stop laughing. The purple grid was still glowing around him, and it seemed to be getting brighter. Something dark tumbled down from the cellar's window. He scanned the floor, his throat tightening as his gaze was met by dozens of dark, beady eyes. It wasn't just the teeny tiny dog in the cellar with him. There were dozens surrounding him, and more jumping in through the broken window. Eli's self-preservation instincts sent up a warning flare. He sensibly called over his shoulder, toward the doorway at the top of the stairs. "Con! A little help down here would be good." The light from his phone flickered and dimmed. A warning icon flashed on the screen. He had less than a minute left on the battery, so he used it to light his way to the stairs. He stepped through the milling crowd of dogs, careful not to hurt any of them, even though the dogs were giving him some very hateful looks. He wasn't about to start booting them for no reason. Eli Carter was not a dog kicker. Once his back was turned to them, though, the dogs didn't offer him the same courtesy. 6 miniatures jumped in unison, grasping his clothing in their sharp teeth. Eli fell backward and landed hard on the cement floor. The force knocked the air out of his lungs. For a minute he couldn't move, much less breathe. He lay helpless and gasping as the light of his phone ebbed and blinked off. A slobbery tongue licked his face, and then 2 slobbery tongues. "Ah, sweet," Eli thought. "They're worried about me." The dogs let out excited yips, as if to say, "This one will be delicious." The dogs piled onto him, a writhing mass of excitement. "Let's form with him," they said. "He can be the torso." Eli didn't know what "be the torso" meant, but he was sure it wasn't something good. He tried to wriggle out from under them, but the dogs had massed together and were heavy as a group. He caught his breath and used it to yell for help again. Over the dog noises he heard a girl's voice. Valentine was coming for him. The idea of her seeing him like this, crushed under a bunch of ridiculously small dogs, spurred him into action. His new muscles weren't just decorative, but strong. He rolled, shedding dogs, and reached out blindly in the dark. His fingers closed around the wooden handle of the snow shovel. He turned the shovel at an angle and used the square business end to sweep a path as he got to his feet. He blinked, his head spinning and pounding as his blood pressure dropped with the upright posture. He'd been out in the sun all day and was dehydrated from too much junk food and not enough water. The violet lines glowed in a grid all around him, more visible now that they were the only light source. He cleared the path again, ignoring the angry barking. He took a step toward the steep wooden stairs, but a sound stopped him in his tracks. The sound was coming from behind him, and it was unlike anything he'd ever heard. The closest comparison he could think of was the ripping of gristle and muscle, like when he used to help his father take apart whole roasting chickens to fry up the pieces separately. Still gripping the shovel tightly, he slowly turned to see what could be making the sound. The light coming through the small window was weak, but Eli's adrenaline made his night vision better than usual. The dogs were no longer dogs. They were fangs and fur and meat, twisting and separating, then reforming. A monster grew before him. More dogs jumped in through the cellar window and applied themselves to the growing mass. Eli bent his knees and took a defensive stance. This wasn't so bad. He couldn't harm a little dog, but this new thing was something he could fight. He had a snow shovel, which wasn't much, but the creature wasn't attacking him yet. He still had time. Eli sneezed. Why did the air smell of sulfur? The grid around him glowed brighter as the creature's bones continued to crack and pop, sliding into new places. The sound was enough to turn his stomach, and he was thankful for the lack of light in the dark cellar. Then Valentine appeared above him in the doorway. He told her he had things under control, because he believed he did. She admonished him for tripping around clumsily in the dark and flicked on the light. Eli finally got a good look at the creature, though there was nothing good about the way it looked. It was big. It was wrong. It was inside out. And worst of all, it was wet. Eli dropped the flimsy shovel, turned to Valentine, and yelled, "Run!" She stood, frozen on the midpoint of the wooden stairs. He bounded up 6 feet of steps and collided with her. "We gotta go," he said. "The servers," she said. "I need direct access." She seemed to not understand the danger, so he crouched down, grabbed her by the waist, and threw her onto his shoulder. Behind him came a new sound from the creature. This was not a growl or a bark, but a roar. Ignoring his desire to turn and look at the monstrosity, Eli started moving up the steep stairs. Valentine squirmed, demanding to be put down and not making the stairs any easier. The air crackled with sulfur, and a plume of fire shot between them in the doorway. The fire hit the stairs above them and exploded in heat and light. The wood was ancient and easily set ablaze by the monster's blast. Eli tried to push through the flames, but Valentine screamed in terror about the fire. The heat walloped his face and caused him to stagger back. This was no paranormal illusion. The fire was real and blocking their exit. He set her on her feet and raced back down the stairs toward the creature. He had to act fast and knock it out so it would stop setting everything on fire. Valentine followed him down to the cellar's floor, moving just fast enough to evade the licking flames of the fire. Now the entire stairwell was on fire, destroying their access to the doorway high overhead. "The window," Eli said, as much to himself as to Valentine. "We can still crawl out the window." Whether they went through the window or up the stairs once the flames settled down, they had to deal with the monster. Eli reached for the snow shovel, his only weapon. At the same time, the horrible thing swung its wet, inside-out head around and blasted fire at the tool. The shovel's handle blackened and scorched, but didn't catch on fire. Eli grabbed the handle, ignoring the heat searing his hands. Something creaked. He turned his head just in time to see the stairs collapse, weakened by the fire. Now their one escape route was a heap of burning wood. The fire simmered down, unable to find new fuel on the concrete ground, but smoke already filled the cellar, making it difficult to breathe. Eli's vision blurred from his watering eyes. Valentine made a terrified noise, and Eli swung into action. He didn't think, didn't assess, just acted. He angled the blade of the snow shovel at the gleaming, bloody mass that seemed to be its neck, and jabbed. It howled and took a step back, wobbling on 4 misshapen legs. He pulled the shovel back to thrust again, but it was distracted by what looked like a tiny, wagging dog's tail sticking out above what had to be a knee joint. The creature seized upon his distraction and bit down on the blade of the snow shovel. It had over 1,000 teeth, which crumpled the snow shovel's square end into a useless, twisted mass. Bone and teeth crunched against metal. Then the beast flung the shovel aside like a discarded toy. Eli found the shovel with his eyes. He could snap the handle and use the ends as stakes, if only he could get close enough. He coughed. The smoke was getting thicker. Valentine found his hand in the murky haze and squeezed it. "The cables," she said. "We can get some of those wires and use them to do something." "Put a leash on the dog?" She coughed from the smoke. "That's not a dog," she wheezed. From the doorway above the smoldering broken steps came a boy's voice. "That's a dragon, Eli." "Joey, get away from that door," Eli yelled. "It's not safe." "I knew it. I knew it. I knew there was a dragon," Joey said. The beast turned toward the boy, inhaling noisily, its head tilted to one side, and Eli got a look at the wound he had inflicted on its neck. The injury was closing up, but slowly. It kept turning, moving toward the boy in the doorway. Eli crept toward the discarded snow shovel, keeping his eyes on the creature as it continued to shift. Parts of its hindquarters were no longer wet-looking, but covered in something that shimmered like feathers or scales. "Get away from the door!" Valentine yelled. Joey didn't move, though. He stood, transfixed, motionless. The cellar filled with an awful roar. The creature was now tall enough to reach up and bite Joey with its enormous jaw. It lumbered toward the small boy. Chapter 17. As its head got closer to the boy, both Eli and Valentine yelled again for Joey to get away from the door and run for help. Joey stood his ground. "This is why I bought a sword," he said. Through the smoky haze, two glinting objects fell from the doorway and landed at Eli's feet. These were the treasures Joey bought at the Ren Fair, a gleaming sword and shield. They were made of metal, and not the simple plastic or wooden child's toys Eli had expected. Eli reached down for the sword and shield, shimmering like magical objects under the smoky haze. Were they magic, or just finely crafted? He wrapped his fingers around the hilt of the sword and the handle for the shield. Perfect! Never in his life had two objects felt more natural in his hands. Eli stood tall and thrust the blade into the animal's feather-dotted hindquarters. It howled and turned on him, flames shooting from its mouth and nostrils. Eli moved his shield arm to block the incoming blast of flame. He advanced on the beast and withdrew the sword from its flesh. Of course he knew a broadsword wasn't for parrying and thrusting, but he'd done what his instincts told him to do. Now he gripped the sword and used it properly, for hacking. He chopped and whacked, cleaving through muscle and sinew. The beast retaliated with another blast of flame, which Eli deflected. The shield heated up, but did its job. Eli advanced, landing harder blows, this time to a leg. Parts fell away. He heard a male voice, Khan. The creature roared and growled, louder than any of the humans. Khan couldn't get down to the cellar, but shouted something from the doorway. A ladder, the servers, a program, other things. Eli heard words, but they were as meaningless as abstract shapes floating down through the smoke. Eli battled, hacking and slashing, deflecting flames, his sword and shield extensions of his body. He gained ground, pushing it back toward the wall of servers. Hope glimmered in his heart. The sword was working. He was breathing hard, using every bit of strength in his body and holding nothing in reserve. The creature, however, seemed to be pacing itself. It held him off with one raised leg while the others regenerated, snapping and popping new muscles into place. The air filled with the reek of sulfur. Wind whistled past Eli's ears, stirring his damp hair as the creature sucked in air to stoke its internal furnace. His enemy hadn't shot fire for a while. It's saving up for a big blast, Eli realized with horror. He kept hacking, sending chunks of meat flying as fast as they could regenerate. His own muscles screamed, telling him he couldn't swing the sword one more time, but he kept going. In the back of Eli's mind, he had a curious thought. Would the creature roast them and eat them? Or would it take his body, rip it into components, and use Eli's parts to make itself stronger? As his muscles depleted their energy stores and his chopping swings slowed down, he noticed the detail in a section of its shoulder. There were two eyes peering back at him from a face within its body. Eli shuddered at what he saw. It wasn't just two eyes. There were dark, beady eyeballs all over it, and they glared back at him with malevolence, as if to say, "You will join us, human meat. Come, embrace your destiny." Eli slowed down as he imagined being part of the beast. The eyes gave him a beseeching look. As he fell under its spell, Eli's will to murder ebbed away. The creature swung its massive head, and blood sprayed from its wounds, splashing Eli's face, momentarily blinding him. 30 more seconds! Cried Valentine. He blinked. He tried to blink the blood away. He had to keep fighting. He advanced, swinging blindly with the sword. The sword swished easily through smoky air. His eyes watered and cleared the blood enough for him to find Valentine's form. She sat, huddled within the smaller alcove, curled up at the back of the cubby between the bags of wintry driveway salt. Eli strained to see what she was doing, but his view was blocked by more blood spraying from the creature. It whipped around, its long, hideous tail narrowly missing his head, and went after Valentine. The alcove was low to the ground, too low for the massive, tall creature. The gleaming red beast couldn't get its terrifying jaws on Valentine, so it snapped and growled at the opening. The fire in its belly was roaring now. Eli could smell it and see orange light through cracks in its body. He didn't know why Valentine thought she had 30 seconds. It could blast her with flame at any moment. In a second, it would. Eli dropped the smoking shield, grabbed the sword handle with both hands, and started lashing at its hindquarters, two-handed. "It's me you want," he screamed. "Take me, not her. I'm much bigger, with more bones and muscles." He cut into its flanks messily, carving away meat and bone. The creature lifted one leg and swatted him to the ground. He cried out in shock as his body hit the hard concrete floor. His bones groaned, but none broke. Beady eyes on the creature's body glared down at Eli, as if to say, "We want her, because she has the brains we need. With her, we will be unstoppable. We'll take you second." Brains. Yes, Valentine had brains, but so did Eli, and he had to use them to save her. He got to his feet and crouched, his sword lowered for a moment. The creature was changing its shape, not just growing and regenerating, but lengthening its neck and elongating its head. Its front legs shortened, lowering its height so it could better snake its head into the alcove to get Valentine. Eli saw his opportunity and seized it. With both hands on the sword, he lifted it high over his head, charged at the beast, and brought the sword down with all his might. It took 3 chops to sever the creature's neck. Tendrils of flame licked out of its neck hole as the body crumpled to the ground. Eli ran to the head and kicked it to prevent reattachment. He kicked it again, sending it on top of the smoldering wreckage of the stairs. The bloody pieces fell apart. Eli turned back to continue fighting the larger mass of its body. Without its head, though, the body had lost its fight. The body fell apart into piles of meat and bone. The violet-hued grid that filled the cellar grew brighter. The air temperature in the cellar dropped. The smoke cleared, and the piles collapsed in on themselves. The beast's vaguely dog-like remains became pools of red syrup, motionless at first, and then shrinking, draining away through unseen cracks. Eli set down the sword and knelt to catch his breath. He watched as the final red droplets disappeared into the cellar's concrete floor. "All done," Valentine said. Eli was startled to hear her voice, even though he'd been fighting to save her. He turned and found that she'd moved out of the alcove. She sat cross-legged next to the shelving unit filled with computers. She had her laptop plugged into one of the computers with a blue cable. "All done," she said. There was a huge smile on her face. "That's a bit rude," Eli said. "Here I am slaying a dragon, and what are you doing? Checking your email?" She frowned at Eli like he'd taken a few blows to the head and wasn't thinking straight. The truth was, he had taken a few blows and would have bruises and lumps in the morning, but didn't realize it now, with all the adrenaline in his system. Coolly, she replied, "I'll check my email in a minute, but first I had to prevent the next world war." "Of course," he said sarcastically. "You were playing a video game." Well, why didn't you say so? She stifled a grin, pressing her lips together tightly, and closed her laptop. Game over already? He asked. Good job with the dragon, Eli. Thanks, he said. Well, that's all I really wanted to hear. You're my hero, Eli Carter. He shrugged and tried to look modest while also looking heroic. If you say so. Chapter 18. It felt good to be called a hero, even if Valentine was teasing. Was she teasing? After being knocked around, Eli's thoughts were still muddled. His head shook up. He reached one hand up to wipe some fluid from his face, unsure if it was his blood or the creature's. Valentine reopened her laptop and started tapping away. He could hear Con talking somewhere in the house. We're still stuck down here in the cellar, Eli called out. Did you find a ladder? Almost, Con called back. Keep your shirt on. Eli stared down at the spatters on his red t-shirt. The poltergeists were never this messy. Was that a tooth stuck in his shirt? He plucked it off the fabric. Yes, it was a tooth. Was it his? He ran his tongue around the interior of his mouth, then let out a sigh of relief. A clattering noise drew his attention to the doorway up above. Con was there with Joey, who was helping him lower a ladder down into the cellar. Hey, I missed all the good stuff, Con grumbled, and I'm hungry. Smells like barbecue down here. They got the ladder lowered, but made no move to come down themselves. Joey stood at Con's side, uncharacteristically quiet. He looked like he might have some nightmares from this experience, but Eli had a gut feeling the kid was resilient, like him, and would be okay. Valentine walked past Eli and climbed onto the bottom rungs of the ladder. I could go for some barbecue, she said. Eli's stomach grumbled. He climbed onto the ladder and followed Valentine up, keeping his eyes respectfully off her bottom. When they reached the hallway, they surveyed the boxes and mess all around them. Valentine reached down and gave Joey's hair a tussle. You did a great job. You were very brave to bring Eli the sword and shield right when he needed it. Joey shrugged, still mute. Eli knelt down to look into Joey's eyes. Are you okay? Nigel ran away, he said. He chewed a hole in the bag, and now he's gone. Probably for the best, Con said. Hellhounds don't make the best pets. Get a hamster next time you go to the pet store. Joey looked up at Con. Nigel didn't come from the pet store. He just showed up one day, like all the other dogs. I kept finding them in the house, but I only kept one. Hamster, Con said. They're excellent pets, very loyal, and they don't have much personality, so if you lose one, you can... Valentine cut him off with a whack on the chest. Listen, she said. No barking. I think every last one is gone. The site is clean. In the silence, something whistled as it approached. The whistling grew louder, like a kettle boiling. A comet, bright and sparkling, whizzed by their heads and shot down into the cellar. Eli stood and took a shocked step back, nearly tumbling down into the cellar. What was that? There was another whistle, and another comet whizzed by. Eli followed it with his eyes all the way down into the cellar, where it sparkled and dove down into the floor. Sparklers, Joey said. Hold your celebrations, Con grumbled. I'll bet you anything that was our Monday job. Another comet whistled by them, followed by 3 more in rapid succession. There goes Tuesday, Con said. Valentine sighed. No good deed goes unpunished. There go all the jobs I had lined up for the week. 3 more comets streaked past them. Eli nodded with understanding. He didn't get how it all worked, but the poltergeists had appeared along with the dogs, and now that the dogs were gone, the poltergeists were returning to wherever they'd come from, along with their potential earnings. Con was right. They'd stuck their nose into someone else's business, and now they had no jobs for the week ahead. On the plus side, the week would also be free of piranha bites. He turned and watched the light show as the comet sparkled through the dark grid and slipped into the ground. He was forgetting something, but couldn't put his finger on it. The lights were pretty.
"She's dazed, but awake,"
Con said to Valentine. Eli cringed inwardly. He'd forgotten about Joey's mother, and now he felt bad for not asking about her. "She needs a rest," Valentine said.
"Would you?"
he asked. "No, I'd pack a bag and get away from here."
"That's exactly what she's doing. Says she'll hit the road tonight, along with this one."
He gave Joey a playful nudge with his knee.
"Which is too bad, because he was growing on me."
"What's happening?" Joey asked.
"You're leaving this city and going home,"
Con explained. Joey seemed to consider this news for all of 10 seconds before saying, "Good." 2 more comets whizzed by. Eli turned and looked down at the shimmering lines of the dark grid.
"Guys, why do they call it a dark grid, anyway? It's so purple. It should be called the purple grid."
Valentine stared at Eli, her ocean glass green eyes wide with astonishment. "You've got a visual on the grid?" He reached in and flicked off the light switch.
"There. You can see it better with the light off."
Con leaned in and looked around the cellar.
"I don't see anything."
Valentine was still staring at Eli. "What are you?" she asked breathily. Con elbowed his sister.
"Manners, Val."
He nodded for them to move along down the hallway.
"Let's get some barbecue."
"Mom!" Joey cried out. They turned to see Joey's mother, awake and standing near the front door. She had a suitcase in each hand. She looked exhausted and malnourished, but her eyes were no longer emotionless. Her eyes showed panic. Eli was relieved to see her out of the crasher-like state, but concerned about her panic. He thought everything was resolved, but the woman seemed to know something they didn't. "Are you from the agency?" she asked.
"Yes," Con answered without hesitation. "We are from the agency, and we're shutting down this project because there was a gas leak in the neighborhood, and some people have reported hallucinations. One guy swears he saw a dragon. Do you have somewhere you can stay for the night, ma'am?"
She blinked in that way smart people do when they catch you talking to them like they're idiots. "You're not from the agency," she said. Eli answered,
"No, we are not, but we do have business cards. I'm Eli Carter. I killed a dragon in your cellar."
She gave Eli the not buying it blink, then gestured for her son to step away from the strangers in her home. "Joey, get over here," she said. "Get your tail in gear and get outside of this house right now before it falls down on your head." Her voice was full of so much mom authority that all 4 of them tripped over each other in their haste to follow her orders. They stepped out of the house into the cool night air. The freshness was in stark contrast to the fetid home interior. An owl hooted. Doors up and down the street squeaked open, and people called for their dogs, sounding more concerned by the minute. Joey's mom walked toward the sidewalk and stopped when she reached the van. It was the only vehicle parked on the street and was in violation of the local neighborhood regulations. Eli could see it from where he stood that someone had tucked a parking violation notice under his windshield wiper. Oh, it was fine for people to adopt whatever mysterious hellhounds showed up on their doorsteps with no paperwork whatsoever, but heaven forbid someone might park a licensed vehicle on a paved street. Joey's mother looked up and down the street, frowning, then turned to her son. "Where's my car?" "It's in the garage," Joey answered. "Remember?" She set down the suitcases and smacked one hand to her forehead. "Yes, I remember now. It's all coming back to me." Softly, Joey said, "I missed you, Mom." She dropped to her knees and grabbed him in a hug. Sobbing, she said, "Can you ever forgive me?" "You didn't do anything wrong," Joey said. "They made you work all that overtime. It's okay, Mom." Did you know we had a dragon in the cellar?" She looked straight at him, wiped her eyes, and said, "We shouldn't talk about things in front of strangers. They're my friends. You can see your old friends soon, people your own age, and you'll go to school. And what on earth are you wearing? Is that tie-dye?" Valentine took a step toward them. "Yes, it's tie-dye. We took him to the Ren Fair today. We had a good time." The mother hugged her son again and spoke directly to Valentine. "Thank you. I don't know who you are, and I don't want to know. It's probably better that I don't." "I reversed your transactions," Valentine said. "You had some really good encryption, unlike anything I've ever seen." "I shouldn't have taken this job." Valentine shrugged. "A job's a job." "Thank you for saying that." Joey interrupted. "Mom, we're all going for barbecue, right?" She swept his hair from his forehead and tucked it behind his ear. "We've got a long drive ahead of us." "You're leaving now?" Eli asked. "Yes, and no," she said. "If anyone asks, I was inside the house when it happened." She reached into her shirt and pulled out an object hanging from a necklace. It looked like a garage door opener. "Is anyone still in there?" she asked. "We're all accounted for," Valentine answered. The woman lifted the device and pressed the button. Loose roof shingles flew off and landed on the lawn next to them. The house bulged outward, cracking and snapping, then suddenly crushed in on itself. More sparkling balls of light dove at the ball of construction materials, collapsing in tighter and tighter. The ground beneath their feet shook, and all but Con fell to the ground. Eli landed on his tailbone, but didn't even feel it. There was a loud pop from the balled-up house, and the ground stopped shaking. Silence for 10 seconds. In the distance, an owl hooted. People down the street were no longer calling their dogs, but gathering on the sidewalks to ask each other about the earthquake. Eli jumped to his feet and walked over to where the brown house had been a minute earlier. Everything was gone. The dark grid was no longer visible. All that remained was a rectangular hole in the ground where the cellar contents had been. Eli was reminded of a favorite childhood story about a tornado that flew a Kansas farmhouse to a magical land. Joey tackled Eli's legs in a big hug. "Bye." "Bye," Eli said. "I have to go be with friends my age," Joey said. "Sorry I can't stay and be your friend." "I'll miss you." Joey pulled away and looked up at Eli, his eyes gleaming. "You're not like other grown-ups. I'm going to tell all my friends about you." Eli managed to smile. That sounded nice. Joey's mother said, "One more minute to say goodbye, then we're going." "Yes, Mom." Joey ran over to hug Valentine goodbye. Joey's mother walked toward the back lane with the suitcases, giving a wide berth to the hole in the ground. The garage behind the house was still standing, unharmed. She opened the garage door, got into a dark-hued minivan, and backed it out. Joey finished his goodbyes by giving Con a hug, then ran to meet his mother in the minivan. Once he was buckled in, his mother drove away, not looking back, and not even tapping the brakes once. Eli waved until their red taillights were no longer visible. They were gone, along with a little piece of his heart. Con slung one arm across Eli's shoulders. "Don't be sad," he said. "We did a good thing tonight. I didn't want to, but I'm glad I did." "He was a neat kid," Eli said. Con squeezed his shoulders. "Cheer up, my man. The world is still full of friends you haven't met yet." Eli turned to him and smiled, because it was true. Chapter 19. They arrived at the barbecue restaurant at 5 minutes to closing, but Con convinced the owner to stay open by ordering one of everything on the menu. As the waitress led them to the best booth in the empty restaurant, Con bragged, "My man here, Eli Carter, slaughtered a dragon tonight." The waitress giggled, then asked what he meant. "We're the city's top software developers," Con said.
Mostly gaming applications. This guy created a level where you battle a fire-breathing dragon with nothing but a snow shovel and your wits.
It's more of a giant hellhound, Valentine added. Dragons aren't real. You're funny, the waitress said. How many drinks? 3?
What kind of beer do you have on tap? Con asked.
Just 3 Cokes, Valentine said. Thank you.
The attractive waitress rushed off, and Con tracked her movements like a dog watching a roasted chicken walk around his dinner bowl. After she returned with the sodas and left again, Con sipped his Coke and grinned. Valentine said to her brother,
Stop smiling like that. I don't even want to imagine what you're thinking about.
Not that waitress. Con kept grinning. I'm just thinking about how great today went. The 3 of us, working together, making a damn fine team. Sorry again, Eli said, for the 100th time. On the drive over, they'd explained to him how Valentine had been on her laptop, working to avert the next World War, and not checking her email or playing a game as he'd suggested. Eli was still embarrassed about his reaction in the cellar, and kept apologizing.
We did make a good team, Valentine said. We're a classic misfit trio, if you think about it. Eli is the brawn, and I'm the brains. Con, you're the comic relief.
Con nearly choked on his soda. Excuse me? No, Eli is the comic relief. Eli, just look at him. Valentine raised her eyebrows and pursed her lips, enjoying Con's sputtering.
He has a handsome face, she said, and he's brave.
Con sputtered in disgust. Eli held out his hands, palms up. I did slay the dragon, Con said loudly. Eli, you slaughtered an entire neighborhood's beloved miniature lapdogs.
Said the waitress, who'd arrived with the first platter of barbecued short ribs. What video game did you say this was?
She set the platter down carefully, her eyes warily examining Eli's T-shirt, which was just red enough to make the spattered blood look like a decorative pattern, or so Eli hoped.
He didn't slaughter all the dogs, Valentine corrected. That little chihuahua got away.
Nigel, Con shook his fist. We'll get you next time, Nigel. The waitress silently walked off to get the rest of their food. Eli grabbed a napkin from the silver dispenser and patted his forehead. You guys sure know how to make me sweat, he said. Con chuckled and stretched his arms out along the back of his side of the booth. They were in a family-sized corner spot, with each of them in the middle of their own bench. Eli finished patting his forehead, let out a sigh, and stretched his arms across the back of his bench, mimicking Con. It felt good to take up space like this and fill his lungs with oxygen. Valentine did the same pose, her fingertips nearly touching theirs. Eli fought to keep his eyes above her chin, despite her excellent posture pushing out curvy things.
I did have fun today, she said.
Are you going to come on more jobs with us? Eli asked.
I don't know. She squinted up at the top of Eli's head. You have chunks of carcass in your hair.
He needs a decontamination shower. Con reached over to serve himself some gleaming sauce-covered short ribs. Valentine kept squinting at his head, only now she was focused on the thin scar at his hairline.
Eli, what's the deal with the thing in your head? Is it really a smugness chip?
He glanced around to make sure the waitress wasn't within hearing range. He turned to Valentine and let the truth come out. He took a breath and said, Valentine, the truth is, I painted shadows on my abdominal muscles using my girlfriend's brown eyeshadow. He clenched his jaw and shuddered. That wasn't the truth he'd meant to tell her. She nodded like she completely understood, though.
I get it, she said. Your microchip makes you weird. It's a weirdness chip.
It makes him special, Con said. He was able to see the grid, and he heard the hellhounds talking to him.
You have superpowers, Valentine said. Eli shrugged.
If you say so.
What else did those dogs tell you? She asked. Did they say what the money was for, or who hired Joey's mother to do that programming? Did they tell you their plan? Were the poltergeists part of the plan, or just a byproduct?
Eli thought back to his interactions with Nigel. The rat-faced dog had looked up at Eli and tipped his head, as if to say, "Just keep catching the poltergeists that slip out of the dark grid and mind your own business." "They were a byproduct," Eli said. "That's my impression anyway. I don't know."
Con waved his hand dismissively, shaking his barbecued meat and spraying Eli with more red sauce.
"Never mind that. Tell us about the money. Where did it go, and how do I get some? Valentine, you saw the code. You can run the same thing on a smaller scale, right?"
She lowered her eyebrows and glowered at him. "I already wiped my computer and my memory."
"You're lying."
Con turned to Eli.
"She remembers everything." "Everything?"
Eli turned to Valentine.
"You're the one with superpowers."
She shrugged. "I'm just a freak." The waitress returned with even more platters, piled high with juicy, gleaming, sauce-covered meat. "If you eat everything, dessert's on the house," the waitress said. Eli looked over the heaps of food. They reminded him of something, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The day had been a long one, and he was awfully hungry. He turned to the waitress.
"What do you have for dessert?"
"Jelly-filled donuts," she said. Valentine gasped.
"Smash off!" "Triple smash off," Con said. "Bring us 3 jelly-filled donuts," Eli said. 3 for the trio of misfit superheroes."
She nodded and left them to their dining. Con smacked noisily on his sauce-covered fingers. Valentine ate with one hand while she drew swirls and grids on a map she'd pulled from her purse. Eli pulled his dead phone from his pocket and wondered how many messages from Brenda were waiting, sitting on a server somewhere. Then he tucked his phone away and started in on his mountain of food. Con held up his glass of Coke and nodded for the others to do the same.
"A toast," he said, "to teamwork. Teamwork!"
They clinked their glasses happily.
Author's note for The Dog Who Barked Fire. I hope you have enjoyed these stories about Eli Carter, his friends, and all of their wacky adventures. This is Angela Pepper, the author of the 3rd and final book in this series. Final for now, at least. I wrote these 3 books back in 2014, and I'm recording this note 8 years later, in 2022. I've currently got my hands full working on some other series, and I don't know if or when I'll be getting back to Eli and his friends, but I will let you know. Here's a little trivia you might find interesting. The current titles for the Ghost Hackers books are the second versions. When these books were originally released, the first one was called About Last Night, the second one was called Bring on the Poltergeists, and the third was called Call of the Wild. Those titles started with the letters A, then B, then C. I was using the alphabet as a naming paradigm. Part of my inspiration for the third one was the title itself, Call of the Wild. It's the same title as the 1903 novel by Jack London, about a dog named Buck who was stolen from his family and sold as a sled dog in the Yukon. I read that book many times as a kid. My mom would see me reading it and she'd say, "Oh no, you're reading that again? It's just going to make you cry." And it always did. But I would read Call of the Wild anyway because, well, it was the 1980s and I lived in a rural area with not much else to do besides fight with my sister over the Legos. Or maybe I would read that book that made me cry because I liked it, because I liked being heartbroken, or because I knew instinctively that it was good for me, that it would temper me, like high heat on glass or steel, which is a writerly way of saying it strengthened me for life. Speaking of heartbreak, if you fell in love with these characters, I suppose you might be a little heartbroken right now that we've reached the end of the Ghost Hackers trilogy. This is Angela Pepper, occasionally breaking your heart.
This has been a production of The Dog Who Barked Fire, a paranormal cozy mystery. Eli Carter in the Ghost Hackers Paranormal Mysteries Book 3. Written by Angela Pepper. Read to you by John Perhala. Copyright 2014 by Angela Pepper. Production copyright 2017 by Angela Pepper.